I don't even know. Yeah, we're live. Okay. Fucking
Cool.
there we go, Sean.
Alrighty, let's do this. All right, if you haven't joined us before, we're reading
Don't even
Benjamin
know.
Studebaker's
Yeah,
The
we're
Way
live.
Is
Okay.
Shut. We're on chapter 5, No Escape. Yeah, we'll start and then we'll do like we've been doing, just do 4 paragraphs or so and then pass it on. All right. Chapter 5, No Escape. In chapter 4, we discussed how political professionals and their followers become politically estranged from the rest of society. What then becomes of everyone else? In this chapter, I want to discuss the fate of those Americans who continue to feel resentment. Every political path these Americans might take is blocked. They cannot reform the global economic system, and they cannot overcome it by revolutionary means. Political professionals do not represent them. Their interests continue to be ignored, and politics continues to disappoint them. They have nowhere to turn, and there is nothing they can do. And yet, these Americans must go on living. They must continue to do the best they can to pay their bills, to pay down their debts, to keep their businesses open. What becomes of them? The path to despair. For the economist Albert Hirschman, people can respond to the dysfunctional systems in 2 ways. They can exit the system, or they can use voice to try and change it. The more loyal to the system people are, the more they try to use voice before they resort to exit. It is very hard for the ordinary American to be heard. The political parties are dominated by the oligarchs and the political professionals who serve them. These classes organize protests. They decide what can be published, and they rarely publish people who don't speak their language or serve their interests. There is, however, one thing ordinary Americans can do: they can vote. As a political scientist Peter Mayer describes it, voters increasingly feel they have been left with what is called democracy, now redefined so as to downgrade or even exclude the popular component. Mayer suggests this produces more and more irregular voting behavior. Creeping fatalism makes voters feel their electoral voices do not matter as much, so they start voting flippantly. As he puts it, there are more and more citizens who, when they think about politics at all, are likely to operate on the basis of short term considerations and influences, a form of voting behavior that is increasingly contingent, and a type of voter whose choices appear increasingly accidental or even random. Do one more, I think. Uh, they may start by voting against incumbents. That's that was the end of the quote, or even random. Sorry. They may even start by voting against incumbents, but as we've discussed, the left, the right, and the center cannot halt the creeping gains of oligarchs and corporations. The 3 factions all make a point to differentiate themselves culturally, but in economic matters, they deliver strikingly similar results. Hirschman argues that the ability of voters to defect from parties that disappoint them in favor of seemingly different alternatives acts as a safety valve, diverting political energy into tame discontent.
As it becomes evident that the throwing the bums out strategy doesn't work, the voters start voting for protest candidates. By voting for people who seem crazy, voters send a message to the political establishment that they want a more diverse set of options. American voters increasingly reward politicians for sounding and acting a little bit nutty. In the 2004 Democratic primaries, Howard Dean let loose his infamous Dean scream. Quote, "Not only are we going to New Hampshire, we're going to South Carolina and Oklahoma and Arizona and North Dakota and New Mexico, and we're going to California and Texas and New York, and we're going to South Dakota and Oregon and Washington and Michigan, and then we're going to Washington, D.C. to take back the White House. Yeah." End quote. In 2004, that yeah was enough to mark Dean out as an unreasonable person. But today, it's run of the mill. Contemporary voters love emotional displays. They especially love it when those emotions look authentic. The more out of control the politician looks, the more authentic the emotion seems. They like it when politicians start crying. They like it when politicians shout in anger. Politicians have picked up on this. They have learned how to pretend to be out of control. The distinction between real authenticity and fake authenticity is slowly breaking down. We can no longer firmly distinguish between satirical candidates and the real thing. Celebrities, comedians, and media personalities can increasingly exploit the ridiculousness of their candidacies, not just to promote their personal brands, but to actually win elections. I'll do one more here. While acting ridiculous can help these candidates win, it doesn't make them more effective at contending with the global economic system. Some Americans signal their frustration by voting for whoever produces the best memes. It doesn't deliver meaningful change, but there are so few other ways ordinary Americans can use voice. Even though it doesn't accomplish much, Americans are very loyal to democracy and to the Constitution. They will use voice for a long time before they consider exit.
As their efforts go nowhere, voice becomes increasingly self-referential. When we start to feel that we're screaming into a void, eventually, we become frustrated even with the act of screaming. Increasingly, Americans are using voice to protest the fact that nobody listens to their voices. They demand procedural reforms because they know on some level that our extant procedures won't respond to them. But, as we've discussed, many of these reforms are never enacted, and those that are enacted prove toothless. They don't unlock many new policy possibilities, and sometimes they even increase gridlock. When, finally, Americans become exasperated with using the vote to express frustration with the procedures they use to express themselves, they'll resort to exit. Exit could, in theory, mean rejecting democracy, but without any credible alternatives to the democratic system, it probably won't take that form. Hirschman suggests exit might instead take the form of emigration. You've probably heard the expression, America, love it or leave it. But for most Americans, it's just not realistic. Emigrating is expensive. Many countries have restrictive visa rules. And besides, the global economic system is global. The other countries Americans could move to are part of it. Even if we can run, we can't hide. There is another form of exit open to frustrated Americans. They can stop participating in politics. They can stop following the news. They can stop voting. Political theorist Robert Goodin draws a distinction between striving and settling. In life, we only have so much time and energy available to spend striving after things. To free up time and energy to strive in any given area, we have to settle in other areas. When we settle for something, we make do with our current situation, accepting it, provisionally, as good enough. As Hirschman pointed out, there needs to be a reserve of political influence to enable us to use our voices. To create this reserve, citizens have to keep some time and energy available for politics. That time and energy cannot be spent on other things. If we find we're not accomplishing much by using our political voices, we can redirect that energy towards non-political life projects. We can only do this if we settle for a disappointing political system. In this situation, Americans give up the hope that the political system will one day deal with sources of resentment. They stop libidinally investing in the political system. The chronic legitimacy crisis is not solved because the sources of resentment are never dealt with, but Americans give up on trying to solve it. They settle for a system they still feel doesn't work. They politically despair so that they can find hope again in other areas of life. They accept and tolerate the resentment they feel towards politics instead of trying to expel that resentment through political action.
Wait, did he just describe what TU is?
Dun dun dun.
I
They politically despair so they can find hope again in other areas of life. Is that what we're doing?
I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, folks. I used to kind of be like, I am not saying that I am not going to be involved in local politics, especially as like an officer in in the union. But like, I used to be one of those like political junkie people who felt like if I wasn't following the news, I was doing something wrong. And I'm not saying I'm going to stop voting or anything like that, but I think I'm going to stop treating electoral politics and parliamentarianism as something like on a federal level as something I have to involve myself in, as especially if it's as a consumer.
Mm-hmm.
If because that, I mean, that's really the rub of it, right? Is like when like feeling like I have to follow politics means feeling like I have to buy something, like I'm obligated to buy something.
It's the commodity form, dude.
Mhm.
By the way,
Yeah.
I love your fucking shirt, dude. Earth Crisis is one of my favorite bands in the whole world.
Oh, thank you. My private soundtrack for TUCon was Firestorm. I think we mentioned before. Anytime I was walking, you saw me walking by myself with my earbuds in, I was probably listening to that same song from that I was listening to in 1995.
Yeah.
So
No, I do think there is I don't know, subjective destitution is like a necessary stage, and I think like Theory Underground is a project on the back end of subjective destitution, and I think the participants, constructive participants, are all people who've gone through that. So yeah, it is very much like a trying to build hope, trying to build something in which you can recognize the hope or something, because there's nothing out there, nothing exists. It's all bullshit. It's all postmodern, meaningless shit.
Is it a need within ourselves that we're feeling like an itch? I mean, I'm getting kind of Lacanian here, but and this is a serious question. Am I scratching the same itch that I was when I was, a person who read Newsweek every week?
No, you're scratching the itch that you thought you were scratching when you were reading Newsweek.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
I think I'd agree with that. Yeah. I don't think that doing like what we're doing is politics. I have a pretty like narrow definition of that. And like you, Jacob, I used to feel as though an important part of doing politics was like keeping up with like basically political gossip. That's kind of how I see it now, as it's like tabloids, but for nerds or whatever, to keep up with like the really, I don't know, the boring like daily life stuff of these politicians. But I did go through a period where I like completely rejected politics, and it doesn't feel the same as this feels. That was a period where I was like totally, hopeless and disconnected and kind of avoiding it and trying to build a life without it. And when that didn't work, I tried to find a way back. So I don't think that this is politics, but it makes me hopeful that it is possible to do anything political maybe in the future.
This shit is pre-political.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
this is my gripe about like certain discourses around psychoanalysis that want to proceed way too quickly to politics. Like, and I think or people politicize what is pre-political. This is my frustration with like writing about Lash, that I've realized is I never want to do this again, because like because it makes me feel that way, because I'm like, I never want to bring him up again, because I'm just gonna talk. I want to almost just talk about Freud and Lacan, and that's it, because it's harder to politicize them. It's a little harder. You can still do it, but like the second you bring up Lash, it becomes a political signifier to certain people, and that is so fucking annoying, because the whole point of the discourse to me is to be pre-political, to figure out like, here I could probably set it better here in a message sent to Dave than I could say it now. Where did I send that? Hold on, give me 1 second. I just want to repeat this. Okay, I said in order to on being pre-political, in order to rethink politics, you have to start from perhaps an ontological place, suspending all preconceptions. That means you have to be willing to sacrifice whatever attachments you might have to current or historical political ideas. You can only earn them by critically suspending them first and approaching them again from 30,000 feet. Maybe you'll come back to some idea you had before, maybe you won't. The point is that you have to sever attachments and start again from scratch, especially at a deadlocked moment like we are in currently. The point is to earn your political beliefs, not claiming them illegitimately as an inheritance from a bygone world.
Yeah,
That's
man.
where I'm at right now with the pre-political.
It's taking a moratorium. The only thing I would say is that you don't have to go all the way to ontology. You can settle for the ontic.
Yeah, I'm still sketchy about that distinction. I still don't know if I completely accept it, but I also don't know that I don't. So I'm trying to work through that.
Well,
so.
the fact that we can have meaningful discourse proves that we can settle on the ontic. The fact that there are undeniable priors, the fact that we can go far enough to have an actual meaningful, concrete discourse means that there is a distinction between the ontic and the ontological. We don't have to go all the way to ontology because we can agree, we can have a shared ground, even though we may have some metaphysical disagreements. That is a demonstration of the difference.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I have so much shit I can say about this, but I've got to do a lot of fucking groundwork to fucking get there. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I want to say before reading the next section, I wanted to say I think it's funny that Zelensky was a comedian before he became the president of Ukraine, and I think we see it with Trump, we see it with not Milosevic. Who's the fucking guy in Poland right now? I don't know, but there's like absurd, larger than life comic book characters who are becoming political leaders, and they're at the United Nations. They're sitting in these quorums of other world leaders, and they're like respected. But I think it's just like perfect that Zelensky was a comedian, and then he became a president. And also the show.
Ronald Reagan.
Well, look,
Reagan acted in a lot of comedies.
Yeah. It's that. Look, America does it bigger, better, faster, stronger first, and then we export it to the rest of the world. And now it's coming back in the form of Trump. But yeah, Barry Goldwater and fucking Nixon and this shit was going on long before the current moment. But there are also meaningful differences.
Perhaps. Yeah, maybe Reagan's a turning point, though, that started us on a different trajectory. Because it's true, if you look at the old models of doing politics, watch a political debate from the 50s, right? It's a completely different mode that is almost unrecognizable.
Yeah.
Well, and that would kind of make sense with what we're talking about in the book too, right? Where it's part of what's happened is before the neoliberal turn, the state, it was well understood that the state had some control of economy, that the state intervened in the economy. Whereas now, with the neoliberal turn also, and with globalization, we've unlocked these now global capital flows that politics can no longer control, national politics can no longer control. And so we've got basically cultural representatives as our politicians rather than people who actually can pull levers and make significant changes. So, I think part of it is well, of course, I want a funny guy to be the president because that's the only fucking thing he's going to fucking do. Is he going to be funny? That's going to be the thing that matters to me, And that's not entirely true. You know what I mean? Don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but sort of in a sense.
Functionally, yeah. It serves the role of entertainment while the Titanic sinks.
Yeah, I mean, and Trump will be a form of entertainment even for those, perhaps especially for those who hate him.
Oh, they're libidinally invested. They're getting off.
Yeah.
And Dan, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Maybe I don't know if this is what you're saying at all, but I would just want to put it out there that, I just really don't think that neoliberalism should be identified with laissez-faire at all. At all. It's the corporation in the first place is a product of the state. It's a legal fucking entity. It's designed to legally absolve the the shareholders from consequences based on what the corporation does that they're a part of. That's why it exists. You know what I mean? So like, and neoliberalism is like that came about because of like state policy, like intentionally. You know what I mean? So like, I just want to like make sure that we like hold that connection. This is not laissez-faire. This is like an attempt to insulate. I'm gonna post something in the way is shut where I'm getting most of this from before by the time we're or maybe right after we leave. But like this is it's just like to hold that and to make sure we like realize that this is this whole thing is a product of the state in the first place. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean that the state can now instantly reverse it necessarily, because they might have unleashed something that they can't control. But in the first place, it is a product of the state. You know?
And it's like the state starts to disavow state activity by doing this turn where they, first of all, they come to protect it in the form of the corporation, and then we introduce the fiduciary responsibility. And so profit drives everything. No one gives a shit. And then the state starts to do this thing where they start privatizing everything, and they like kick the legs out, but like it becomes non-government organizations and the nanny state. The nanny state isn't actually like formally a state apparatus. It's a private public partnership. So like there is this weird disavowal, but it is that movement from the public to then we have the corporations, and then it's re-privatized. So it's like enclosures all over again, or like an intensification of enclosures, because like the state does the enclosures, and then this is why people go to neo-feudalism, because it's an easy metaphor to kind of explain how like the relationship. There is a new authority. There is a new legitimate arbiter, and it is private, but that is also enforced by the U.S. military. So it's, neoliberalism is one of those words.
I want to bring in like political literacy a bit too, because I feel like, although I completely agree that neoliberalism is simply like a different set of state policies rather than a lack thereof or getting rid of them, that's still what the rhetoric is, and that's still what like libertarians are pushing, and people who want a really small state, they do talk about like this idea of just kind of getting the government out of the market. And so even if that's not what's happening, I think we still need to wrestle with that impression that people have that like, I don't know, that the best way forward is for the state to be like subsumed under the market or to disappear, or and they don't, like, most people don't have the political or financial or economic literacy to like understand that laissez-faire is actually just a set of very specific policies. And I think like also like, I don't know, it's tough to say that like the government, I don't know, I guess I want to complicate just a bit the idea that like the government like caused the corporation, and maybe it did, but I think like the idea that we're moving into like a new form of capitalism altogether, finance capitalism, where like the governments are like subservient to these global financial corporations that are not very well understood by most people. It just it undermines, like, I guess it feels like the relationship between corporations and finance and the government are just becoming like more opaque to the majority of people. And so
I think we're sort of, I feel like America First and all these sort of like economic nationalisms are a response to like what you're saying, Sean, in that like, okay, the reason we have this quote unquote laissez-faire, you know, it's not laissez-faire, but we've got this corporatist, I guess, model is because the state enabled and allowed it. So what we need now is for the state to just do what it did in the New Deal or something. And so I think the question is that actually possible any longer? You know, or have we like moved into something else? Have we sort of like activated, you know, a global capital that nation states can engage with, but can no longer just be like fucking pull the lever? You know, they can engage with and like deal with as parties at the table, but can no longer really like intervene in the sense of like, all right, we're going to change the rules of this game, kind of thing. I don't know.
And, yeah. And so how much is this book about? We're reading right now. How much is this about? It's impossible to do social democracy, for instance, and how much is it about like it's impossible to have the political will to do social democracy, for instance? I think it's about both, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's why I've been looking forward to this chapter so much. I feel like this is the juice is in this one.
Juice is loose.
Oh no.
On that note, should we get back to it then?
Let's go.
Striving, settling, and sinking. Who wants to pick that up?
I'll go. Striving.
Oh, sorry. Is it possible for one of you kind people to screen share the document?
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I can do that right now. I totally forgot to do that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'd like to do my share of the reading too.
Is it there? Did it work?
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Cool.
All right. Striving, settling, and sinking. This doesn't happen all at once. When voter turnout starts to sag, politics increasingly focuses on reactivating fringe voters. The larger the pool of deactivated voters, the more there is to gain electorally by finding ways to reactivate them. Politicians cultivate false hope that the unsolvable problem might yet be solved in a bid to reactivate voters. It is hard for voters to resist false hope because it is hard for voters to be absolutely certain that they should settle. When Gooden considers when we should decide to settle, he writes, "Some easy answers come readily to mind. When it has become perfectly clear that you are not going to get what you were originally striving, although quixotic quests have their charm too. When you discover some new facts about the project you were originally striving for that make it less appealing than it originally seemed. When something else more important comes up, and for some reason or another, you cannot strive for both at once. When time has simply run out, either on the project you were striving to accomplish or on your own days on Earth. The thing is, it is unclear that Americans are not going to get what they're striving for. During chronic legitimacy crises, lots of competing explanations and solutions are thrown up. The center, the left, and the right all understand the crisis differently. They all propose different strategies for solving it. Even within these factions, there's disagreement about the right approach. Some believe in the possibility of reform, while others think change can only come through revolution. While it may be easy to say that any one of these strategies cannot be made to work, it's much harder to establish that none of them can. In this book, I've worked hard to show that all of these strategies are dead ends, but many people who read this book won't be convinced. Even insofar as this book does convince some people to abandon failing strategies, many of those people will talk themselves into pursuing other strategies that also won't work. New facts that cast doubt on one particular path out of the crisis did not necessarily lead to settling. They can just redirect that striving energy down a different path. Individual Americans politically deactivate from time to time because they become busy with other things. But this doesn't end the crisis, because individual Americans who politically deactivate are often replaced by new young voters and by reactivated voters. Some number of voters are in political despair at any given time, but democracy doesn't run on despair until it permeates politics, until voters are deactivating with such intensity and in such a widespread way that politicians cannot replace their energy.
Jacob, do you want to take up widespread deactivation? Cool.
Yeah, I would love to. Widespread deactivation occurs when the political imperative to reactivate voters leads the factions into an arms race. They compete with each other to generate hope and, when hope fails, fear. When they fail to keep their promises, or when the other side fails to keep theirs, the basis for hope and fear collapses. This produces a reality check. When voters suffer a reality check, they tend to become more cynical and harder to reactivate. That forces the factions to make even more ridiculous promises to trigger reactivation. When they inevitably fail to keep those promises as well, the gap between expectations and reality grows, and the reality check hits even harder. After enough hard hits, people politically shut down. Consider how many reality checks voters have been made to endure since 2008. At the start, Barack Obama made vague pledges to solve the global economic crisis, promising to deliver hope and change. Obama's opponent, John McCain, thank God he didn't run against John McCain.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Die Hard reference for anyone.
Yeah. Obama's opponent, John McCain, downplayed the seriousness of the crisis, claiming that the, quote, fundamentals of the economy were, quote, sound. By framing himself as a striver, Obama elevated expectations for his administration and activated a large number of voters. But Obama could not establish a consensus on how to make sense of the crisis. As Andrew Gamble put it, a fundamental disagreement has emerged over what counts as legitimate policy. The fiscal stimulus of the Obama administration was regarded by some Keynesian economists as too small, but it was denounced by fiscal conservatives as having the wrong priorities, because not only did it fail to tackle the ever-rising national debt, but it also accepted that it was going to rise still further. Did I do one more paragraph?
Yeah, you can do one more.
Okay, cool. When Obama lost control of the House in the 2010 midterms, his ability to pursue further striving strategies was thoroughly obstructed. From here, Obama's rhetoric shifts. He starts trying to downplay the crisis, to persuade his supporters that he met their expectations. In 2011, he signed the Budget Control Act, agreeing to reduce federal spending. During the 2012 campaign, he sought credit for, quote, the recovery.
I think it's me now. Looks like it. Yeah, back to me. The thing is, Obama oversaw a recovery in which 52. That's where we are, right? Yeah. Okay. The thing is, Obama oversaw a recovery in which 52% of inflation adjusted income gains went to families in the top 1% of the income distribution. Between 2010 and 2016, many rural counties lost jobs, with half of the country's growth taking place in just 20 metropolitan areas. This meant that not only did Obama fail to alleviate resentment, he presided over a period in which, for many people in many places, it intensified. As Obama shifted towards McCain's position, the Republicans sought support from voters who still felt the country was in crisis. The GOP reframed itself to capture the support of those whose hopes Obama raised and then dashed. When Obama was the striver, they blocked his striving, but when Obama settled into a centrist posture, they moved into a political space he vacated. The Romney campaign in 2012 said that Obama can't change Washington, but while some can't live up to their promises, others find a way. Before long, Donald Trump was very explicitly promising to look after the forgotten. claiming that he alone could solve the country's problems. At the Republican National Convention, he said, "Our convention occurs at a moment of crisis for our nation. The attacks on our police, the terrorism in our... I'm not going to do that. The attacks on our police, the terrorism in our cities threaten our very way of life. Any politician who does not grasp this danger is not fit to lead our country. I have a message for all of you. The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon come to an end. Beginning on January 20th, 2017, safety will be restored. I have joined the political arena so that the powerful can no longer beat up on people that cannot defend themselves. Nobody knows the system better than me, which is why I alone can fix it." That's an intense quote right there. Trump didn't attempt to counter the hope and change rhetoric by playing down the seriousness of the crisis. Instead, he countered it with an even more aggressive, striving posture. Instead of winding down the expectations Obama raised, he raises expectations again. He calls the situation a crisis and claims that the American way of life is under threat. But he pledges that through him, all of these terrible things will soon come to an end. That four?
And
I think
yeah, I think that's 4.
Yeah.
In this way, the opposition party not only declines to help wind down resentment, it increases it for electoral advantage. Of course, once in office, Trump swiftly began pretending he'd solved the crisis, bragging that the economy, quote, is stronger than ever before, end quote. He had to do this because, like Obama, he was thoroughly frustrated by his opponents and had little else to run on. In response, the Democrats returned to the striving rhetoric, with the left promising, quote, a future to believe in, end quote, and the center framing Trump as a terrifying would-be fascist autocrat only the Democrats can stop. American voters get whiplash from this. Wonderful things are promised and terrible warnings are issued, but very little comes to pass. Before voters know it, the same politicians who are sympathizing with them are telling them they ought to feel gratitude for a situation that hasn't changed. This produces a vicious cycle of striving and settling, of political deactivation and reactivation. When striving and settling become mutually reinforcing for an extended period of time, a third possibility beckons, the possibility of sinking into a deep despair. Shall I keep going, or does anyone want to comment before the next section?
I just want to say, when you actually read that Trump quote, it brings it home, like how he, at least to me it does, like how he, because I don't listen to him like I'm hanging on his every word, because I don't take him, I don't know, I don't take politicians seriously, and in a way, and like as actually having something to say that fucking matters, that they're gonna back up. And I just see Trump as a politician in a way that his supporters don't. I just don't see him as different. And so I don't see him like liberals see him either, because I don't see him as a unique fucking evil. I just see him as just another one of them. But when you actually read the quote carefully, you're like, okay, now it's easier for me to put myself in the shoes of a Trump supporter. That's kind of what struck me about
Hell
just
yeah.
reading it.
It's
Yeah.
persuasive without
Yeah.
any context. That sounds good. I don't know.
Yeah, right? That's well said.
Yeah. In his acceptance speech for this year, he promises literally a new golden age. He says a new golden age will come. I will bring about a golden age. It's like, yeah, man. Like, I want a golden age. I don't know if he's gonna be able to fucking do it, but like, you can see why people are like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, people are hurting. Everyone's hurting. We're all fucking falling. And like we can't, I don't know, there's like this impulse in the mainstream and the polite liberals to like discredit the suffering of millions of culturally right-coded families and shit, because they may have some fucked up beliefs, and they probably do have some fucked up beliefs, but also they're human beings suffering.
And they might be right about some shit too.
For sure.
That,
For sure. That too.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think there's an instinct that is like, which is, I think part of what this book tries to answer, which is why is it surely that in the most powerful, if not at least one of the most powerful countries in the world, why are our living standards just fucking plummeting? And and so it's like I think a lot of people are like, well, we just put the right guy in charge and he'll fucking right the boat because the boat is sound. The boat is obviously very big, so but I don't know, maybe it's more complicated.
I mean, if for a lot of people, if they really recognize that the boat is unsound, that throws the past 40 or so or 50 years of their adult life into question potentially.
That's facts. Yeah.
Yeah, man. We all need to be rooted in something.
Yeah. I mean, I think about like the older people in my life, and I wonder, like, did you have any inkling that it was going to come to this shit? You know what I mean? Like, it just seems to have surprised everyone. Like, no one saw that this would be where we are right now.
Those that did see it were ostracized and like instrumentalized. And well, I mean, don't read Karl Marx. He's an evil communist and he wants to suck your children's blood. And Malthus is just a fascist. And I'm not saying I'm a Malthusian, but everyone who speaks up gets othered and ostracized and blah blah blah.
Yeah, no, I think it's that similar like thing that we know about the economy, that like when it's on the way up, a significant number of people are like, this is forever. Like that's the trajectory we're on. It's amazing. Everybody buy Bitcoin or whatever. And it's like, I feel the same way about the baby boomers, right? It's like they experienced, like, not every one of them, blah, 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 but in general, they experienced like a period of plenty where like, yeah, father who has a blue collar job can buy a house and a car and support a family, 5 kids, whatever, it's fine. And now he's, living on a lake in his cabin and, having a great retirement. And yeah, so I think it's genuine that a lot of those people, whether they're our parents or whatever, they really did kind of believe in this idea that this trajectory was going to continue, that the quality of life was going to be better for their kids than it was for them.
Mm-hmm.
I think even like he references Keynes, like even Keynes was victim to this like optimistic mindset, and like Marshall McLuhan, like people who were like theorizing the world and like with Keynes trying to figure out the economy, like reading Keynes now, it's like, dude, he was so fucking wrong. And he was a critical guy. Like he was one of the guys who was saying, we have to do something. Our house is on fire. Let's put it out. But even he underestimated how bad it was. Because he was writing in a period of plenty.
He did live through the First World War. So you would expect him to be able to have a certain degree of cynicism. Maybe even the Great War didn't instill enough cynicism.
That's the cancer of historical materialism. It's a fucking brain cancer, and it convinces you of like the necessity, and it turns you into a teleological thinker. And when you're a teleological thinker, you either kill yourself or you become an optimist. Those are the two fucking options.
Yeah,
and I would add fascists under the umbrella of optimism.
1000%.
Yeah.
Yeah. But sorry, I cut you off, Gear.
That's
yeah. Go ahead, Sean. It's kind of a tangent, so I'd rather you go.
Isn't that the whole fucking? I mean, that's how we're describing like how modernity gives way to postmodernity, right? Where like I think Benjamin was talking about it as, I don't remember when and where, but as it was at the fucking turn I think he said something at the turn where it was like, yeah, modernity is like when everyone is like teleological, everyone's like, oh, there's one thing we're going towards,
unitary.
There might be different competing universalities.
Yep.
Which is fuck, I want to go back to Kant to deal with that. But like, so there's like competing universalities, but like there's everyone's like, oh, it's gonna go one place, you know, and then postmodernity is it's gonna go like no one knows where it goes. You know what I mean? It's just like, yeah.
I think Aaron Reich's book on Bright-Sided, this one chapter that really surprised me was sort of about the massive mergers and acquisitions and restructurings and everything that happened, I believe, in like the late 80s and early 90s, although I couldn't tell you like the exact period of time. But it really struck me because I wish I had the book open, but like the number of people who got laid off in America in that time period from all these mergers, acquisitions, and restructurings is unbelievable. Like it's in the millions. It might have been like 3 million or something, like something crazy. And it's so strange because I think like this is thought of as a period of like financial stability, I think, but then it caused just like this incredible tumult in the lives of so many people. And you had people that went from being software engineers to driving taxis. Like that was a very common trajectory in that time period. And I was like, maybe it's just because of my age. Like I graduated high school in 2008. So we talk a lot about that financial crisis. But the fact that there was like this massive wave of like layoffs, you know, in like not that far before that somehow just, I don't know, people like, I haven't really heard people talk about like another kind of financially devastating moment that just really like ruined or changed a lot of people's lives in that earlier period. And it really kind of undermines the idea that the financial system has any kind of stability, really. And also, yeah, just that capitalism has any stability, because at that period of time, it just completely changed its priorities, and the downstream effects of that like cannot be underestimated.
Ted Reese and Heinrich. Ted Reese writes about like the crisis at the core of like capitalism is a crisis machine, and like that is the way capitalism works. And
that is its source of stability, though, isn't it? Like that's like it's like a beach. It's like wind and waves and storm, and then like it all clears, and it's just a beach again.
It's a,
you know, the driftwood is rearranged a little bit.
It's a one-sided stability, and it's this ideological stability that it does exist, and you can find examples and you can point to it and you can demonstrate, see, it does work. But also that's predicated on the continuation of crises. It's also predicated on the global south and like rape and genocide and pillage. Like, yeah.
It always works until the crisis gets too bad. Right.
And by then it's too late.
Isn't it remarkably good, though? It keeps righting itself, though. The crisis hasn't gotten too bad. It keeps bailing itself out, and it keeps churning. You know, that in itself is a form of stability.
I mean,
that's why nothing ever fucking changes. It just keeps
I think
going
you're both
forever.
right.
yeah. I mean, yeah, but I mean, we had two major economic collapses in the past 80 years, right? We had the entire global economy collapse during the Great Depression, and then we had the entire Eastern Soviet bloc collapse in the 90s. So, like, I don't know, that seems like a lot of big blips to the global economy. I mean, like I agree with Ted Reese completely. Like, capitalism did okay by the COVID crisis, at least in most of the in the West and in the developed, again, in the global North. But I just don't know that the COVID crisis was a big enough crisis yet. Maybe.
But I don't want to underestimate capitalism either, because we had those really big economic collapses, the Great Depression and the Soviet bloc, as you say, but neoliberalism after that, or and the Soviet bloc is outside of that, sort of, and prior to it somewhat. Like neoliberalism is a response to that. It's trying to make that impossible. The Great Depression impossible to ever happen again. And maybe it just forestalls it until there's a big, giant, huge super depression or something. I don't know. Like, I'm not an economist, and most economists aren't fucking economists either. But it's like underestimate it because we don't know if it's ever gonna fucking collapse. It might just keep going forever. It's Benjamin's point about middle capitalism.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like what stability are we measuring? Like, are we measuring wealth transfer towards the top? Because I think that would be a measurement of
Yep.
like whether capital flows have become unstable. I think I don't think that would be like the only or even the best way to measure it, but if nothing interrupts that, if 2008 didn't interrupt that, if COVID didn't interrupt that, if these events actually even just accelerated that transfer, then there is a stability there, right? Not for everybody else, but for
Yeah.
capital itself, right?
I don't
No, we're
I
on
don't
the
mean
way.
to I don't mean to say that neoliberalism it's like I feel like it's very viral and very capable of reproducing itself. A neoliberal state might collapse, but like that ideology is going to have already been picked up somewhere else by then. So the security of neoliberalism isn't necessarily for the people in whose state neoliberalism exists. But again, they're also not the ones who are for whom they're the ones who that wealth transfer is uh, drawing from rather than the ones it's going to. Like when you're I don't know, when your capitalist economy in crisis crumbles, you can always flee to South America and get into Peronism or something.
That's why the instability is the source of its stability.
Yeah.
It's like the fact that the whole flow is this thing is you can just it fucked up here, just all right, bye. And it just keeps moving.
Yeah, it's
Stability
the
is the source of its
contradiction
stability.
Yeah.
right at the center of it. And it makes it very hard to understand. It makes it very hard to understand and for people to wrap their minds around, for sure. Because you can point over here and say it's stable, and you can point over here and say it's unstable. And those things are both happening simultaneously.
Yeah.
For
Especially
sure.
if you insist on being a nominalist, you can't understand.
Yeah.
Refuse to think dialectically, right?
Yeah.
You need to take a parallax view here.
You do.
Yeah.
Shall
Should
we
we
keep
keep on
going?
moving?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm
Yeah, I
still
think we
going.
should.
Yep.
This one's pretty short,
Oh.
so I think I'll just knock it out. Politics without politics. When they are politically deactivated or in despair, Americans retreat from politics into 4 primary zones. I call these the 4 Fs. They are faith, family, fandoms, and futurism. I am not here to pronounce judgment on the intrinsic value of the 4 Fs or to criticize the people who value these things or construct their lives around them. Nor am I suggesting that the 4 Fs are valuable only insofar as they enable people to escape politics. There are plenty of reasons a person may value faith, family, fandoms, or futurism that stand apart from the political crisis we are discussing in this book. I myself sometimes think about basing more of my life around the 4 Fs, in part because politics is depressing, and in part because the 4 Fs often seem to me to have a lot of value. I think about writing about Platonism, about having children, about writing about basketball, about speculating about the political economy of future societies. I may yet end up doing any or all of these things. The 4 Fs are compelling and often pleasant, and I don't blame anybody for wanting life to be more compelling and more pleasant. That said, this is a book about contemporary American politics, and each of the 4 Fs interacts with this politics. Americans who are frustrated with politics look to other areas of life for meaning. Deactivated Americans try to hide from politics in the 4Fs, and political professionals looking to reactivate these people have to find them and drag them back into politics. This means political professionals must find ways to infiltrate the 4Fs, to politicize them, to make it impossible for them to function as enclaves. Because of infiltration, Americans who become interested in the 4Fs for reasons that have little or nothing to do with the chronic legitimacy crisis must deal with the fact that the 4Fs are constantly being politicized. Protecting the 4Fs from politicization itself often requires political action. The ability of Americans to avoid politics therefore depends, in part, on politics. To have a democracy that truly runs on despair, the American political system must find ways to politicize forms of non-politics and anti-politics. To better demonstrate what I mean, let's consider each of the 4Fs in turn.
Faith. Faith often seems like an alternative to politics. In the United States, we ostensibly have freedom of religion and separation of church and state. In the past, historians have often viewed the spiritual and the temporal realms dualistically. British philosopher Bertrand Russell alleged that when politics becomes grim, both philosophy and faith become more escapist. He says this about Plotinus, a 3rd century Neoplatonist philosopher. His life is almost coextensive with one of the most disastrous periods in Roman history. Of all this, there is no mention in the works of Plotinus. He turned aside from the spectacle of ruin and misery in the actual world to contemplate an eternal world of goodness and beauty. In this, he was in harmony with all the most serious men of his age. To all of them, Christians and pagans alike, the world of practical affairs seemed to offer no hope, and only the other world seemed worthy of allegiance. But in more recent years, historians have increasingly realized that Russell's view badly misrepresents this period of Roman history. Historian Edward Watts observes that the apparent retreat into the spiritual realm was often appealing to Romans precisely because of the political power it could confer. For starters, a young Roman could choose to be a bishop, and bishops increasingly involved themselves in politics. But the life of a desert-dwelling hermit could look appealing for political reasons too. A 4th century bishop, Athanasius, argued that young men should abandon politics for the hermit's life precisely because of the political power and influence hermits might enjoy upon their return from the desert. Watts describes the hermit's political journey this way. These spiritual achievements ultimately led the hermit back to the world. When he returned, he managed an estate peopled by ascetic followers, corresponded with emperors, provided instruction to the entire city of Alexandria, and refuted the teaching of Greek philosophers. Ultimately, Athanasius returns the hermit to the world as a figure whose radical renunciation of conventional social and personal ties lent him a new, powerful type of authority whose values elites could immediately understand. Increasingly, even seemingly contemplative types like Plotinus are being revisited from a political perspective. Ordinary Americans do not embrace faith to try and have political influence, but spiritual audiences are an attractive power base for young professionals hoping to establish a following. In Chapter 1, we discussed how more professionals are competing for fewer high-quality professional jobs. As more professionals struggle to find meaningful roles in politics, the media, the arts, and the academy, they become embittered by these institutions and they start looking for alternatives. We are all familiar with the evangelical Christian televangelists who use faith to have lucrative media careers many of them otherwise would not have enjoyed. These televangelists heavily mobilize Christians for conservative cultural causes. By doing this, they politicized Christian culture, encouraging churches and churchgoers to view their faith as inextricably linked to political action.
This kept large numbers of rank-and-file Christians politically engaged for a while. But today, predominantly white evangelical Protestant churches are less politically engaged than congregations of other faiths. The National Congregations Survey reveals that 40% of predominantly white evangelical Protestant congregations report engaging in explicitly political activities, but 61% of Catholic congregations have done the same, along with 45% of mainline Protestant organizations, 81% of predominantly black evangelical Protestant congregations, and 59% of Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and Buddhist congregations. The conservative movement does not have a monopoly on mixing faith with politics. In 2020, Marianne Williamson ran an openly faith-based presidential primary campaign as a Democrat. A substantial number of self-described American socialists report coming to socialism from a Christian perspective. Beyond Christian socialism, there is also the emerging church movement, a pluralist attempt to inject continental European philosophy into the Anglophone spiritual marketplace. The entry of the professionals into the faith space makes faith an unstable enclave for workers seeking to disengage from politics. As the standard professional career paths become less appealing, some professionals pursue faith-based careers. This politicizes forms of spirituality, and it spiritualizes politics. Those who truly wish to escape politics find that they must also escape organized religion, because under the guidance of professional preachers, faith so easily becomes politics by other means. It's possible that as Americans grow frustrated with the politics of conservative congregations, they get picked up by progressive alternatives and vice versa. But it's also possible that the despair that is creeping into American politics is also creeping into the spiritual realm. Across all Christian denominations, professionals are noticeably more likely than workers to attend church services regularly, while workers are more likely to say that faith is important to them. There are fewer professionals of faith, but among those who do believe, there is more commitment to institutionalized forms of religion. There are more workers of faith, but they are more alienated by professionalized religious institutions. The percentage of Americans who attend church has dropped more than 20 points since the 1980s. A full 34% of Zoomers are religiously unaffiliated, compared to just 18% of baby boomers. Instead of exiting politics or faith, many American workers may exit both political and religious organizations, seeking meaning elsewhere.
Do we want to chat, or do we want me to just pick it up and keep going?
Hello.
I'll go. But
Can I mention a book really quick?
yeah,
It just relates right to this. So if anyone wants to kind of go with this. Tara Isabella Burton is this theologian and writer that I really enjoy, and she wrote a book called Strange Rights, which I think is really important. It is like a general audience book, but it challenges the idea that America is increasingly secularized just because America doesn't go to church the way that it used to. And there's some really interesting stuff around there. There's stuff about sort of these eclectic, bespoke DIY spiritualities that people are building for themselves, and also that the reasons for going to church are changing as well. And it just, it paints a pretty rich picture that I often haven't seen when discussing sort of like the de-churching that seems to be happening. So, yeah.
I want to read that for sure. Tara Isabella, what?
It's Tara Isabella Burton, and that book is called Strange Rights.
Yeah, I'm gonna read that. Sounds good. I mean, my first thought on the end of that was just like, how bad do, how dumb do politics and churches have to be for people to seek meaning in a where else do you go? Like on the internet, in a world just totally devoid of fucking anything meaningful at all in the economy? Like, where do you go? I mean, It just seems like these institutions might be failing us more than we're failing them.
You have to pay to go to church, so I don't want to make it completely transactional. You don't have to pay to go to church, but in to be a member of a lot of churches in good standing, you don't just have to tithe; you have to tithe a specific percentage of your income. So like if that is a arrangement of religion that is like less appealing, like you said, Sean, I think that's down to in certain respects to the product being offered. Because people have worked a lot harder in American history, hours wise, than they have now, and they found times to go to church. So like, it's not, I don't know, it's not time energy that's always keeping people away, which was my first instinct, was like, oh, people are going to church less, not because they're less religious, but because they're working more. And that's certainly true for a lot of people, but there were times when people worked 16-hour days and they still, got out of the mine and went to church in the evening. So,
And this is a little bit personal for me because I'm like I was raised evangelical Christian, and there was just not just there were no answers to my questions. It's that there was no willingness to even fucking engage with my questions, you know? And so like at 17, after going on like several missions trips, I was like, I just fucking, it just snapped. It was just like the lights went off in the room and I was like, oh fuck, I don't believe in this anymore. I didn't want to not believe it anymore. It was like someone turned the lights off in the room, and it was right before I was about to go on and speak in front of the entire congregation. And literally, it was like someone flipped the lights off in the room. I don't believe in this anymore. And then I went up and I was like, this is the last thing I committed to. And I went up and spoke to the entire congregation, and that was it. And it was like, but part of me is like returning to like theology and stuff now, because I'm like, look, the answers are out there. There are people dealing with this, but like in my church there was like no one took questions seriously. You know what I mean? And so like that's what I mean by like how much are the institutions failing us. Like now I'm finding answers to fucking theological questions in fucking GDEC, you know.
So church was like schoolified. Like church came to reflect the model of like the American public education system, where it was like, you're just here by rote. None of this matters. None of it's real. Like, shut up, sit down. That's interesting.
It was insisting that it is real. It's even worse than that. Sorry, I'll shut up after this. But like, it was even worse than that. It was like insisting that it is real, insisting that this does matter, but then like actually at the same time not seriously engaging with the material.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan, you were gonna say something, and then I was going off.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of add to what you're saying. Is I grew up in like a Southern Baptist kind of thing, and I found that questions were actively discouraged. Questions were a lack of faith, or like kind of a lack of trust, I guess. And it was, and the answers. I asked a question that was like, what's, why is it that in Jesus says this thing in Luke, and then Jesus says this thing that's different in John? And they told me, well, it's a matter of looking at it, how you look at it. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And they're like, that's it, But anyway, that's kind of personal. I know what you mean. That shit's crazy. It blew my mind.
I wonder if it's maybe like a change in the relation of the congregation member or the subject of the religion to the religion itself. Because I have a suspicion that a lot of these traditions have always been that way, have always been, don't ask questions, just do the thing, perform the rite, perform the ritual.
It was all Luther's fault.
But, well,
they used to burn people at the stake for not doing it.
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
I think you're right about it.
But there,
Yeah.
like the ideology of the self-actualizing individual, like this neoliberal subject where it's you can liberate yourself, you can be emancipated. We are moving toward the future where all your dreams will come true, and so like a new desire was created that didn't previously exist. So maybe it's not so much that the local pastor or whatever didn't engage with your questions, because I doubt they ever really did. But it is the case that like everyone started believing the lie of neoliberalism that you could be whatever you want to be. You just have to put your best foot forward and work hard and try hard and stuff. Like I think that ideology is more damaging than the church. Maybe I don't know.
Do you mean that ideology is taking people away from the church?
They can't coexist. They're mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
To build on that, one of the things I think that was the experience, at least in the way the Southern Baptists do it, is the Southern Baptists are kind of run like a corporation.
Mhm.
And so the business of running the church was really the business of the pastor. That was the job. And like the pastor usually came into it out of a love of the faith, you know what I mean? But found that the vast majority, you know, like the way y'all have talked about the monastery and the way people in universities, like who work in universities, you spend what 95% of your job doing administrative bullshit. Like I think that that's kind of the same thing that happens in churches as well, and that they're, and I feel like it reminds me of the book where he talks about we think of these things as refuges, or as enclaves where you can go to get away from politics and political economy, but political economy will find you wherever you are. And that it's constitutive, so you can't have a church without that church being compatible with the larger political economy.
Yeah.
I think too, like I wonder how things are dovetailing, like this, like neoliberal consumerism and the church, like, because I know, like, it seems as though, at least in the middle class and above, there's like more and more pressure on parents to have these insane birthday parties that are like super photogenic and whatever. And I don't know, my partner and I went out for breakfast or brunch on a Sunday, and I was like, whoa, we like saw church people, right? Because we're usually at home or we're like in the forest. So we went in there, and it was really interesting. I was like, right, of course, there's like this whole other like culture in this town, and everyone looks amazing. Everyone's in suits. The hair's slicked back, nice dresses, ironed, clean, like everything. And I know that's probably always how people have wanted their kids to look at church. But I also am like, man, like first of all, I was thinking about like the expense of those outfits, and especially the constantly growing children, and like how often do you have to buy them like a new suit to keep them. And then I don't know, just like it seemed really nice. It seemed like they were having a nice time. It seemed like they were bonding, and from the outside, that's what it looked like. But I guess because my partner and I never eat out, like, it's like maybe once a month, twice a month. It's a big deal for us financially to do that right now. So I'm like, man, do these people do this every week? So then it's like, it's not just the outfits, it's not just the transport, it's not just the tithing, but now it's also a restaurant meal. And I just have to wonder, like, is there space for like poor, busy, grubby families to like show up and hang out with people and like be involved in a church? Or are people going to feel like too embarrassed to kind of, if they can't meet this like certain standard, do they just kind of like stay home instead? Especially if like poor people are more likely to believe and wealthier people are more likely to go to church. Like that really struck me in this passage.
Right. Family. The next F. The family is sometimes thought of as the conservative institution of last resort, the private space where traditional values can be preserved in defiance of the surrounding culture. But the family is not an exclusively conservative hideout. Plenty of people on the left and in the center have families. People who are unable to politically instantiate their values often try instead to instantiate them at home. And many liberal political theorists have considered the family an important tool for protecting liberty. Those who reject the nuclear family model often embrace other kinds of household institutions that perform similar functions. When I use the term family, I am not excluding people who live with their parents, with members of their extended family, with roommates, or in communities. All of these social structures can potentially serve as enclaves from the political. It has become harder to make nuclear families work. As wage growth increasingly fails to keep up with the rising costs of living, it has become more difficult to build a household around a single earner. This makes it harder for families to achieve a division of labor that all family members will accept. In the 1970s, half of married couples were dual income households and half depended on a single earner. By 2010, 2/3 of married couples were dual income, and just a third were single. In single income families, real inflation adjusted household income has grown negligibly since 1980. Dual income families continued to see income growth in the 80s and 90s, but growth plateaued for them after 2000. Almost 2/3 of American couples now begin marriage in debt, with an average debt load of $30,000. Nearly half of Americans in serious relationships report fighting with their partner about money. To make things even more challenging, more middle aged Americans are having to provide financial support to elderly parents and to adult children. More than 60% of parents with adult children continue to provide financial assistance to those children, and more than 30% of adults with elderly parents provide financial support to their own parents. Roughly 15% of Americans between the ages of 40 and 59 are supporting both a child and a parent at the same time. Those three, I'll do one more. As economic change generates chronic stress, it's harder for Americans to get married and to sustain marriages. In 1970, 82% of 23 to 38-year-old adults were married, and 70% were married with a child. In 2019, just 43% of adults in the same age range were married, and only 30% were married with a child. This hits workers especially hard. 65% of college-educated Americans were married in 2015, compared to just 50% of Americans without degrees.
Am I next here?
Yes,
I think,
ma'am.
well, you folks skip me, but feel free to.
Oh, you go for it.
Yeah,
Oh,
you don't
sorry.
mind? Okay. Yeah, no. I didn't take it too personally.
Oh yeah, I forgot to write your name down in the flow, so I totally skipped you. My bad.
Where are we at again?
Americans have increasingly
Yeah, okay.
adopted.
Cool.
Yeah.
Hey, dogs. Sorry, they're being crazy. Give me. You know what? Here, why don't you go and then I'll go.
Sure, sounds good. Okay, Americans have increasingly adopted different household models. Today, 14% of millennials live with their parents, 14 live with other members of their extended family, 12% are raising children by themselves, 9% live completely alone, and 7 live with non-family members. For a significant number, this is not by choice. It's still the case that 58% of never married adults want to get married someday, compared to 27% who are unsure, and just 14% who say they never want to get married. A full 68% of never married adults say that financial instability is one of the reasons they're still single. Why do so many people still want to get married? It must be acknowledged that romance has long been pitched to Americans as an escape route. Psychoanalytic theorist Todd McGowan argues that in the United States, genuine love has been replaced by an ideology of romance. Romance promises us a way out of the conditions that drive us to despair. Through an idealized romantic encounter, many of us imagine we will somehow be able to find the sense of meaning and purpose we struggle to find in politics or at work. In practice, real relationships with other people are difficult, and they're made more difficult by economic circumstances. Instead of helping us transcend our problems, the quest for romance becomes yet another expression of them. When partners inevitably fail to deliver them completely and permanently from darkness, Americans break up, cheat, or get divorced. They hop from relationship to relationship the way committed political and spiritual idealists hop from party to party and movement to movement. Oof. We go through a cycle of hope and disappointment, of romantic deactivation and reactivation. In this way, we forestall the arrival of despair. Regardless of whether we agree with critiques of the whole romantic enterprise, it remains the case that the economic space for families is contracting. Whether we like it or not, it will become increasingly difficult for nuclear families to persist, and other family models will be adopted. There will be more experiments in communal living arrangements, and more young adults will live with their parents or with their extended families. These arrangements may work well enough for some people, but there is evidence that they won't suffice for everyone. In Japan, real wage growth has been stagnant for the past 30 years. This has put enormous strain on Japanese families and Japanese youth, and more than 1 million Japanese now live as hikikomori. The hikikomori live alone or with relatives, but rarely venture out into society. They often do not go to school or work jobs. Many remain financially dependent on their parents into middle age, and there are now many hikikomori in their 50s living with parents in their 80s. When their parents die, their financial situations will deteriorate. There is evidence that this phenomenon is starting to take root in the United States. Many of the mental health conditions associated with the hikikomori, like anxiety and depression, are increasingly prevalent among younger Americans. I think I'll just finish out this section if that's all right. Some young Americans, are falling into a deep despair about their romantic futures. In recent years, communities of incels, of the involuntary celibate, have sprouted up online. These despairing romantics offer each other emotional support, in part by viciously criticizing the women who turn them away. In rare cases, incels turn to violence. The incels have become fixated on the idea that their problems can only be solved by romance and by the family. They are looking for partners to save them. Unable to get the only thing they think will bring them peace, they travel a sad, dark path. As economic conditions make it harder to sustain any kind of family model, defenders of the family are increasingly forced to look to politics to shore up family structures. But the American political system is not capable of delivering the economic reforms that would be necessary to achieve this. President Biden's Build Back Better bill included funding for childcare. Rather than raise American wages to enable parents to spend more time at home, Biden sought to give Americans money to pay other people to raise their children while they're stuck at work. Even this proposal failed to pass. If the family ever offered a way out of politics, it is increasingly difficult to make use of it for that purpose. But there are other, less traditional ways of trying to escape.
I would say that that's a pretty big if there, as someone who's pretty who's deep enough into Althusserianism that I named my dog after him. Like, he's very clear that if we aren't gonna regard the family and the church as part of the state, then we should regard them as being apparatuses that replicate the state, the ideology of the state, which in many respects would be the state itself. So I'm curious, like whether that could hold for the next two Fs, though, because I do think that is. I'm not saying that the family always reproduces the state or that the church always reproduces the state, but under post turn of the 20th century capitalism, I think that's definitely the case.
So the problem isn't in these institutions themselves. The problem is in the material conditions kind of surrounding that determine the possibilities of these institutions, of these structures. So it, like, the family is this thing that's common to all of us. What it looks like exactly, like the specific form, it's not really that interesting. But it gets turned into like a vehicle. It gets turned into, you know, the state apparatus, because it's determined by like relations of production, exchange, blah blah blah, all this stuff. So like the problem, like the family could be a line of flight, could very well be a line of flight. The church could very well be a line of flight. These things all could be, but they're determined by capital and capitalism. And so we're limited. We're limited as individual subjects. We're limited as members of a family unit. We're limited as members of a congregation. We're limited as fans of a commodity. Well, I don't know. Look, I think a fandom necessitates the commodity form itself. But like the problem isn't with the family or the church. The problem is with the commodity form. So I do think it's a bit silly to problematize the family, because it's a thing common to all of us.
Do you think that Benjamin is overly problematizing the family here, or
I
would you
don't.
lay that at the feet of other people?
I would absolutely lay that at the feet of. No, no, he is absolutely, but it's the way in which it gets operationalized is where the problem lies, not the form itself. And I think there are a lot of people who want to say, like, kill the nuclear family. Oh, the nuclear family is the vehicle of, you know, the Protestant work ethic and this and that. While there's some truth in that, it's also a relationship born of necessity. One man, one woman, procreate, make a child. I think pronatalists are silly. I think antinatalists are silly. And I have 7 kids, and I think we're all doomed. So, like, what am I? Like, that itself is a contradiction, right?
Hell yeah, Nance.
Yeah. Like, the problem isn't in the family. The problem is in material conditions. But there are people who want to act like it is the nuclear family's fault. And I think a lot of energy gets spent on that when in reality we should look to free up families. And if your individual family unit looks different than my individual family unit, fucking right on, because I'm a pluralist at the end of the day, right?
I feel like it's interesting that I feel like if anything's going to bust up the nuclear family, it's going to be
capital itself, right? Well, and it already has. Like, there is no such thing as a stay-at-home parent anymore. Like, every family is now a dual-income family. Like, you just, as earlier Kier was saying, like a single working man could provide for his family or their family or whatever. And that's true. There was a point in time here in the heart of Empire when one income was enough to support a family. And now it's no longer the case. It costs.
So here's.
I was going to say it costs thousands of dollars to care for children a month. Monthly, it's $1,000, like multiple thousands of dollars every month. That's fucking insane.
So that is insane. Absolutely insane. Here's a spitball. Going off of what both of you are saying, is it possible that the family reproduced in this Althusarian way, insofar as I understand it, having read like almost zero Althusar? Is it possible that the nuclear family at the time when there was a single male breadwinner was reproducing sort of the state apparatus in a way, because the father was sort of the stand-in for the state at home, whereas today, when that is not so much the case, this is just a spitball. I don't know how much there is to this, but like today, is family more a haven in a heartless world, where we're all sort of like many of us are returning to the family, as like in the hikikomori example, to find a way to get out of the fucking storm around us. Because I don't see the family. If the family's reproducing the ideology of the state today, if that's happening, that's because the state and capital are the same thing, and now we don't feel like we need to we need to provide prohibition for children anymore. That's obviously not universal. That was the big problem with my fucking narcissism essay, and I'm like I'm rewriting parts of it to make it much more clear what I'm trying to say. But that's what I mean. If the state apparatuses are reproducing themselves in the family, then that's happening in a different way than
So
it was.
so
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
the
Go
postmodern
ahead. Sorry.
parenting, like we hear the word permissive parenting, and a lot of people confuse that with like gentle parenting, or I would call it like proper parenting. Like you need prohibition, you need limits, but you also shouldn't be a toxic, abusive dick, and there's a way to do that. But people get it confused, and I do think there's a lot of time energy lack there. Like it is exhausting to parent your children. It does take time to explain to them the consequences of their actions rather than just smack them in the fucking face. And I've done both. And but you can, I don't know, man. Like I almost want to say the permissive parenting, the postmodern parenting thing is itself ideology that, and it's been blown out of proportion. And it's not even that there's a bunch of postmodern permissive parents out there. It's that there are children with no parents because their parents are working or their parents are in prison. Like it's not a problem in parenting styles and family dynamics. It's legitimately the case that there's just children with no families. I think that's the problem. I think.
Well, and I agree with that, and I would also say like two things I have to say about that is that like I'm like the reason I'm rewriting that essay to like clarify the scope I'm getting at, but I also think like permissiveness isn't permissive also, like I think there's people I know who are like the relationships they have with their kids are like fucking just strange. They're just strange. They're not like super like you can do whatever you want. It's more like this like mommy is never not there. Like mommy, even when she's not there, she's still there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, I'm not. I really want to also be clear. I'm not like attacking the family. I think the family is like
No,
so important. You know what I mean? But like, there are ways in which I think that the neoliberal state does also sort of reduplicate itself at the level of the family at the same time. So
Yeah, I just kind of want to bring like surrogacy and IVF into this as well, like especially, I don't know, and adoption, like because I don't remember before, the last 5, maybe 10 years hearing about like wealthy people, at least not in public, right? Like the Kardashians, like other people have like carried their pregnancies for them. And I guess like that's first of all different than adoption, which obviously has happened for a very long time. And I don't know, when we're talking about like children being raised without parents, I feel like that stuff muddies it a bit too. And I don't know if we fully understand like what is the effect developmentally on an infant who is like, immediately removed and given to someone else who is not like having the same like hormonal experience as the birthing parent. And I'm not like anti all of this stuff, but it's just like when we're talking about like, do we have children that basically don't have parents even though they do because they never see them because they're working? It also makes me think like, is it of equal quality, the relationship that is had by, and I mean, you can have a terrible birth parent too. So I'm not trying to like oversimplify, but this idea of like families fragmenting, and then also the way that like new technologies are just making like new compositions possible. What does that mean for people? What does that mean for children and families and the communities they live in?
do we even know what families are at this point? Like, do we have to redefine it? Do we have to figure out what it is again?
Well, it's like that might be, to sort of, that might be has a potential for freedom in it. It's it's the unfreedom of capitalism, but it's like part of the freedom that capitalism brings is that it eats the overcodes, right? So so it's like it's like, I guess that what Benjamin's getting at here is that like one could say that the trad people have it wrong because it's like, oh, that's old and that's not going to be possible. But also, what he's saying here is that even if you're like polyfamily, I'm going to go in all the way on this new family form that capital allows. It's like, even that is not going to be a retreat or an enclave.
In 5 years, we'll see breakfast cereal commercials with 6 parents in them.
Well, and sometimes I wonder about how much poly stuff is just like, bro, I need roommates. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, we need to figure out how to be poly
Well,
because we're going to all be
I
fucking
mean-
living together when we're 50.
I mean, they might be on to something because there is something in the way that families used to live prior to the Second World War.
More communalism.
Right? Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
They might be discovering in their new, and I'm allowing for the possibility, we've been talking about nature and stuff like that. We might be allowing for new arrangements that are just taking on old forms.
Yeah.
Like, hey guys, I've got a great idea. How about family members to help out raising our kids?
Multi-intergenerationalism, more kind of communitarian approaches. And I think it's the family is changing necessarily, and we have to accept that. And I think both sides are maybe trying to do it like a denial of the fact that it still remains a necessity. And we can either do like the public schoolification of the family itself, where, the kids never spend time with relatives, at least, if not biological parents, then biological relatives and people who have stakes and who actually give a shit. And they have these physiological connections as well as emotional, social, and cultural connections. But it is also true that like necessarily, I lived in a house for about a year I had 4 kids at the time, and my brother had 3 kids at the time, and we both had wives at the time. And so there was 14 fucking humans living in a single suburban home. And you see that all over the place. New family arrangements out of necessity.
Yeah, totally. I think I'm curious, with polyamory, for example, is it more urban? Right? Are people more likely to be polyamorous? And I say that just because I don't know, there are a bunch of different things. I've lived in a lot of queer collective houses, surprising no one probably. And it's there's multiple things going on, right? There's a lot of people are alienated from their family of origin. So that's one layer. But another layer is that it's usually in a city or in proximity to a city, which means that there's more age segregation. We're spending time with only people of our own age. And so, when you're 20 and you ran away from home and you're hanging out with other 20-year-olds, it's how do you get what you need? How do you, because it's so common for either family members or older people in a community to help provide for the younger ones. So if that's just totally disconnected, then you do end up trying to form these, what turn out to be pretty unstable and unsustainable networks and chosen family, just to get everyone what they need. And I think, and especially, de-churching, that's another layer for people who are in these collective houses. They're probably not religiously affiliated, which means that's another area or another potential way to get resources or get support that they don't have. And so I think there's just, there are all these different pressures on young LGBT people that end up creating these houses out of necessity. And I don't know, I think usually they just get talked about I don't know, people want to be with people that are like them, or lots of people romanticize it, right? And they're chosen family, blah, blah, blah. And it's I think there's a lot more going on than is usually acknowledged, and what that formation, what causes it, and then what its effects are as well.
And it's a big fucking deal. I think that the church used to be the quilting point of a community. So it united families together, and that's what I mean by community is an interlocking set of familial networks, family and friends, So it's like, but and the church used to be that anchor that would tie together in a lot of places for a lot of people, not universally, but a lot of the time. So it's like the fact that that's kind of out the window for so many millennials and Zoomers and everything is like, that presents a problem. Whatever you believe, like religiously, metaphysically, whatever you believe, that presents a social problem. You know. Fandoms.
Yeah, you want me to take this
Yeah,
one?
go for it, Jacob.
Cool. It's very apropos. You guys can see my toys right there, and they're properly in view. Um, if Americans find themselves dissatisfied with the political, religious, and family structures available to them, they can instead attempt to construct a sense of meaning around the media products they enjoy. Many Americans try to build a sense of community around sports. For some, it's important to keep politics out of sports, to maintain sports as a non political form of community. But that's never been simple. There are endemic debates about whether athletes and sports writers should get political precisely because so many of them inevitably do. The Trump president decisively shattered whatever remained of the cordon between sports and politics in America. Once some athletes began protesting against the administration, the rest had choices to make. If they participated in protests, they opposed Trump. If they refused to participate in protests, they were suspected of supporting Trump. Like many presidents, Trump invited athletes to the White House to celebrate their victories. But the president's critics expected athletes to boycott the Trump White House. There was no way out of this. Either you go to the White House or you don't. Athletes had to take sides. Sports writers, understandably, saw an opportunity to drive up clicks and revenue by encouraging athletes to make political remarks. Many made both solicited and unsolicited public political statements. Regardless of whether we like these political interventions, they've made one thing clear. It's not possible for ordinary Americans to avoid politics by throwing themselves into sports fandoms. Just as many professionals enter the spiritual space in part because politics, art, media, and the civil service have become too crowded, many professionals become sports journalists in part because political journalism is too competitive. They are excited to have the opportunity to inject politics into their sports coverage. They will work very hard to defend their newfound right to do this. In the age of the internet, the crusty editors who used to stop sports writers from getting political are no longer capable of performing that gatekeeping role. Increasingly, both athletes and sports writers will use sports to do politics and wage culture war. In the name of defending democracy, they will force sports fans to engage with their political views. If the fans don't like it, they will be accused of giving aid and comfort to authoritarianism. Should I do one more?
Yeah, I think one more would be 4, right?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There are, however, other fandoms out there. Increasingly, Americans are retreating into niche fandoms that are not large enough to attract substantial regular media coverage. The internet has allowed Americans with unorthodox interests to find each other. There are message boards, subreddits, and YouTube channels devoted to many different television shows, films, and artists. If these fandoms get too big, they start to attract media attention. Celebrity musicians and film franchises are covered heavily by entertainment media. Many celebrities wade into politics just as professional athletes do. Many franchises become embroiled in controversies over whether they are political enough or political in the right way.
Do we want to just? I don't. The order's all messed up
Bernie?
because I fucked up. So, do we want to just start over? I'll go, and then we'll go here, Dan, Nance, Jacob, in that order. Is that okay with everyone?
Sure.
Unless Dan really wants to go, because I think you haven't gone for a while.
Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, we're just gonna start over from the top then, just like that. Where were we? Were we at? But what about the little fandoms?
Yeah.
I think. Okay, cool. Let's check it. But what about the little fandoms? Even when fandoms remain small and stay out of the limelight, they find they can't avoid political dynamics. To give a proper example of this, it is necessary to wade into something genuinely obscure. There's a video game company called Creative Assembly, CA. They make the Total War games, a set of strategy games. There are some YouTubers who cover news about these games. They are the bridge between the fans and the game designers. Some of the fans prefer games set in historical periods, while others like games set in fantasy worlds. One YouTuber called Melkor branded himself as a spokesperson for fans of CA's historical games. He made videos arguing that historical games were a good investment and would please fans. He accumulated more than 28,000 subscribers. Eventually, Creative Assembly released a new historical game. Melkor championed the game on his channel. He received early access to the game and promoted it heavily to the fans. When the game released, many fans considered it disappointing. Melkor was stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he defended the game, the fans would be unhappy with him. But if he criticized the game, CA would be unhappy with him. He ended up making videos both praising and criticizing the game. No one was happy with him, and he received a lot of criticism. He became increasingly unhappy. Eventually, he quit making Total War videos. In his final video, he despaired. After 5 years of studying this community deeply and dearly, I 100% know that CA are to blame for all those major aspects of internal toxicity that exists within this space. There's more divides here than near enough. There's more divides here than near enough anywhere else. And despite my best efforts to break such divides down, to get the communities to unite, I've failed. That is. The more energy fans put into fandoms, the more political fandoms become. Media professor Mark Duffett argues that fandoms are a way of engaging with the power relations that characterize mass media. It becomes important to the fans to ensure that the kind of media they enjoy continues to be produced. This forces fans to become interested in the way the culture industry works. They start building theories about how companies make creative decisions. They begin trying to use their voices to get the kind of content they want. Prominent figures in communities like Melkor become representatives of different currents in their fandoms. They take fans' grievances to companies, and they explain the company's decisions to the fans. But the fans operate at a distinct power disadvantage, and when they're disappointed, they turn to their representatives. Sometimes they threaten to stop consuming content, to exit the fandom. They go through all the forms of political expression Hirschman outlined, but they do it not to change public policy, but to get companies to produce the forms of entertainment they prefer.
Literary theorist Hannah Muller argues that fandoms have always been quasi-political. Even at smaller scales, fandoms become interested in creating and sustaining an ideal community. Often, divisions open up and fandoms become an alternative public sphere, a place where fans discuss their shared interests and deliberate over the procedures they use to moderate their discussions. These discussions and meta-discussions feel more participatory than ordinary political discussions, especially in the early stages when the fandom is small and individual participants can easily make themselves heard. But they swiftly replicate the cultural divisions that characterize ordinary politics. Mueller argues that fandoms are characterized by a conflict between heterogeneous voices and a default fanish identity that was, for the most part, considered English-speaking and predominantly white. This mirrors the conflict between descriptive and symbolic representation we discussed in Chapter 4. Progressive fans want their fandoms to reflect the heterogeneity of the fans who make them up, while conservative fans want their fandoms to generate a sense of unity by reflecting a set of shared values. Both progressives and conservatives participate in fandoms as an alternative to mainstream politics. But progressives flee politics in search of spaces they feel better acknowledge group diversity, while conservatives flee politics in search of spaces they feel enable them to enjoy a sense of unity. They therefore enter fandoms for conflicting reasons. The culture war is replicated within the alternative public sphere. These divisions are easily exploited by media companies and by political professionals. By playing into these antagonisms, they can get the fans to buy things, and they can even get fans to politically reactivate for a time. Mueller puts it this way: corporations and political actors have predictably reacted to these developments with efforts to regulate, commercialize, appropriate, and infiltrate fanish spaces, practices, and content for their own interests. The heavy use of participatory elements in transmedia marketing can support civic participatory engagement by boosting the fans' sense of agency. This already precarious and complex relationship between fan-organized activism and capitalism has become even more fraught with the efforts from political actors to infiltrate fanish platforms and exploit and steer politicized energies within fan communities. End quote. Ultimately, the same frustrations that mar politics reappear in fandoms. It is too easy for fans to become divided about the kind of content they want media companies to produce. Media companies are even less democratic than governments. Their executives answer to shareholders, not fans. The media companies don't have to respond to the fans' demands, and they can exploit divisions within the fandoms to give the impression they're listening when they're not. When the conversation about the content gets too hot, the companies can distract from substantive controversies by kicking up meta-conversations about the quality of the discourse within their fandoms. The people who don't like the new products are framed as toxic. They're on the wrong side of the culture war. The same cultural disputes that divide and frustrate voters thus divide and frustrate fans. It should not surprise us that media corporations let us down. But in our frustration with democracy, Americans often seek solace from structures that are even less responsive to us than democracy is.
Next
I
up
love
would
that
be-
sentence. Oh, go ahead, Sean.
Oh, I was going to say next up is you for reading.
Oh, for sure.
can
I was just gonna
feel
say, I
free.
love that sentence. He became increasingly unhappy. I read that in like a Arrested Development narrator voice. Do we want to talk about fandoms or keep cooking?
It's up to you.
I guess one thing I've kind of been curious about. One thing I think that's left out of this is out of the 4 Fs, and I wish that kind of there was a 5th F, was like independent arts spaces. That's a place that I've gone to, and I know most of the people I know try and exist in independent art spaces because that's a place where they feel that they have agency and they can, have freedom to make decisions that affect their lives. And I think that's, also increasingly not true, and I wonder how related it is to fandom stuff.
I almost want to slot that under futurism in the sense that sometimes those spaces feel like predeterminative, where it's like, let's build democracy or like whatever we're not getting from politics, like can we do it in this art collective? But I don't know if that resonates with you, Dan, and we haven't read it yet, so.
No, that makes good sense. Maybe we'll read futurism and jump into it.
Yeah.
All right.
Do it.
Futurists are not merely interested in the future. They are enthusiastic about what the future might bring. They are motivated in the present by what they think they or their descendants, or even humanity or the universe writ large, might get out of the future. Futurists believe in science and technology, and they believe in the human systems they associate with scientific and technological development. While media companies promise an escape in the present, tech companies promise a destination that will make the journey worth it. Through fictional universes, the entertainment industry offers something pretend right now. By contrast, tech companies offer something that will ostensibly become real if you have the patience. Futurism is therefore more appealing to rump professionals who have the resources to be patient. It is particularly appealing for professionals in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math fields. If your work is contributing to the future and you really believe in what the future holds, your work will feel valuable in an obvious way. Tech companies have every incentive to encourage their workers to be futurists. If they're futurists, they will work longer hours for less money in service of the cause. Tech companies do this in part by presenting themselves not merely as corporations, but as the expressions of the will of particular oligarchs. They frame these oligarchs as uniquely gifted geniuses. A person who worked for Apple in the aughts was not just working for Apple, but for Steve Jobs. A person who works for SpaceX doesn't just work for SpaceX, but for Elon Musk. The genius is meant to be so brilliant as to transcend the political and economic obstacles that stand in the way of the future. The charismatic leader figure is a common trope in the history of political thought. Often, when political theorists can see no straightforward way out of predicaments, they posit, with varying levels of seriousness, that some tremendously capable person might come along and somehow, through sheer brilliance, set things right. We see this in Carl Schmitt, Max Weber, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Machiavelli, Thomas More, and even Plato. This figure goes by many names. Sometimes theorists use examples like Lycurgus, the semi-legendary Spartan lawgiver. Other times they make reference to an orderer of republics, or legislator, or sovereign dictator. Some frame this person as legally, philosophically, militarily, or spiritually gifted, while others, like Schmitt and Weber, frame this person as a specifically political figure. But in all these accounts, the special one comes along, shatters all the barriers, and creates a new kind of political system. I think that's 4.
By contrast, the tech oligarchs have largely positioned themselves as non-political or even anti-political. When their new technologies get politicized, the oligarchs receive attention from political actors they do not necessarily welcome. Elon Musk has entered the chat. When Facebook became a political football after the 2016 presidential election, Mark Zuckerberg was horrified to find himself at the center of controversy. Political theorist Dan Runtsman described Zuckerberg as having bumbled his way into politics. Facebook, starting with Zuckerberg, has expressed genuine surprise at discovering how its technology can be used to spread fake news. The architects of its system are stumbling across its pitfalls with the rest of us. There is every reason to believe Zuckerberg when he says he wants to make the manipulation stop. He didn't intend for it to happen. That's the problem. No one did. It's just a side effect of being in the advertising business. Ooh. Edward Bernays has entered the chat. The more political the tech geniuses get, the more their genius credentials come under scrutiny. The charisma of the tech oligarchs depends on the widespread belief that they are geniuses, that they are, in fact, very smart. American politics is riven with division. Any attempt by the oligarchs to do politics generates attacks on their intelligence, along with attempts by regulators and trustbusters to make a mess of their business empires. So, instead of pitching themselves as public revolutionaries, they frame themselves as leaders of a private revolution. This revolution changes society, not by replacing or reinvigorating democracy, but by creating new choices, new things, and new experiences people can buy or invest in. When tech oligarchs try to do more than this, the cost to their personal brands is both enormous and difficult to recoup. The sinews of futurism are pitched as potentially life-changing. At the extreme, there's going to Mars with Elon Musk. But for those with less patience, there are cryptocurrencies, non-fungible tokens, and an enormous array of new ways to gamble and speculate. An infamous ad for Crypto.com features the actor Matt Damon explicitly comparing buying cryptocurrencies to going to space. It is through these mechanisms that working people are brought into futurism. Incredibly famous celebrities now film ads promising ordinary people that if they buy the right new financial product, they can get rich quick, and their conundrums will be solved. If you're looking for one of the other F's, for faith, family, or fandoms, the futurists will promise to help you find it online through dating apps, social networks, and even AI companions.
While the political system may eternally disappoint, futurists bet on the ability of the economic system to overcome political problems. The oligarchs and celebrities are the people who have been financially successful in the existing system. As it becomes more difficult to be financially successful, the people who do manage to succeed develop a mystique. If they are successful because they are geniuses, then they have some special, ineffable quality mere mortals cannot obtain. Like blue-blooded aristocrats, they appear to have been chosen, in some sense, by nature to lead. If they are successful because of personal virtues, then they are examples to follow. Their lifestyles are to be imitated. Whatever they invest in or consume becomes desirable. This hagiography around virtuous genius oligarchs forms when large numbers of people take the economic system for granted. This tendency makes futurists stand out. Those who commit to faith, family, or fandoms often harbor implicit or explicit critiques of the economic system, even if they do not act upon those critiques politically. The retreat into faith, family, and fandoms is in part about finding a space free not just from politics, but from market forces. All three of these structures allow participants to build communities around alternative values, values that may not be otherwise economically or socially rewarded. But futurism is an investment in the economic system itself, and the people who embody the values of the and the people who embody the values that the economic system rewards. So while futurism is an escape from democratic politics, it is decidedly not an escape from capitalist economics. Do I have one more, I think?
Yeah, I think you
All
have
right.
one more.
Cool. The penetration of politics into faith, families, and fandoms comes alongside marketization. Political professionals wage culture war because it's profitable. They stoke cultural conflict among the faithful and within fandoms to increase clicks, views, and donations. As economic conditions become more difficult for families, family structures are increasingly determined by the need to economically survive rather than by the alternative value sets of those who enter into them. Politics and capitalism are introduced into these spaces together, and they work together to diminish the space for alternative value sets. Because futurism is a way of economically leaning in, it contains no alternative value set. The values of the futurists are the values associated with rich, successful oligarchs and celebrities. They are more explicit, more intense versions of the values the economic system already rewards. Now, I would wonder what Dave might say in response to this sort of wholesale binning of futurists, or for the potential that futurists offer for what's the phrase that Benjamin uses? That futurism contains no alternative value set.
Once again, the framing, the problem doesn't lie in the disposition. The problem lies in the form that disposition expresses itself. So it's the appearance of the thing, not the essence of the thing. That's the problem here. And the problem is that with a forward-looking disposition, all you have to engage with is the commodity form itself. So if you fetishize the future by becoming fascinated by the commodity version of the future is technological progress will necessarily solve all our problems. And if you find the right product, and there are people who think, well, I'm not the silly consumerist, I'm the discerning smart guy, so I know what is the right commodity to purchase or invest in or whatever, they're still doing the silly thing. Like, the problem isn't in a disposition toward the future. The problem is when you exercise that disposition by way of the commodity form, rather than genuinely looking at the future and saying we must create new conditions of possibility. Because this Theory Underground is necessarily a futurist project because it is focused on creating new conditions of possibility. We're also necessarily, we reject the commodity form because the commodity form is just the expression of the value form. And that is where our problem lies, in the value form. So Benjamin is not saying don't have a disposition toward the future. He's saying don't be satisfied with the commodity form. That's what he's saying with the family too. And that's what he's saying with the fandom too. It's not that you can't be passionate, and it's not that you can't genuinely escape the world by diving into something that brings you pleasure or brings you satisfaction or allows you to express yourself in some way, to express something inside you in the form of art or in the form of like whatever. Like, the problem is that all these things are determined by the commodity form itself. That is the problem. So I think it's interesting that you picked up on that. I do, because I think we necessarily have to be oriented toward the future, because that allows us to see that we have to create new conditions of possibility. We have to create radical desire. Like this book is saying, there can be no radical desire. So earlier when Sean asks, like, can we have the political will? No, we can't have the political will. We have to create that. We have to create the desire. And along with the desire, we have to create the conditions of possibility for the culmination of action itself. So while it's not politics that we're doing, it is praxis that we're doing nevertheless. And that's all in a forward-looking disposition. We're moving forward, man. We're not satisfied with now, because now doesn't exist. Now is fiction. But it is valid, because the word futurism itself could lead one to think that having like a future-oriented disposition could be problematic. But the thing is, don't become fascinated by the commodity form. You'll be okay. Like, no matter what you do, as long as you seek the genuine object of use out that is covered up by the commodity form. Like, there's an object of use, and then there's a commodity form. And all these things that we're engaging with in our private life and our civic life everything that exists today is the commoditized version of it. So it's up to people to say, fuck it, this is bullshit, this sucks ass. I'm going to create a real object of use as opposed to being satisfied with the commodity.
And Jacob, you said that you have to pay to go to church. Like, how much is that the problem, that the church has become commoditized? The church has become sort of neoliberalized, and that's why it's fucking dumb. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels
Yeah.
like these oligarchs aren't offering the future actually at all, right? They're offering some strange fever dream that will like never be available to 99% of people. So I think that's an important distinction.
And I think in order to get into to even to begin to create the possibilities for a desire of something beyond the commodity form, we've got to recognize that just I don't know that what we have sucks. You know, that you got to have that moment in the pit where you're like, this doesn't make any fucking sense. It's just chaos, and there's no actual coordination here. That's my sort of frustration with these spaces that are ostensibly built around, and you know, specifically for me, like art spaces that are ostensibly built around creating meaning, is that it seems like there's no recognition that meaning is not possible. That we're all just like yelling, you know. I don't know. So that's why that was what really attracted me to Theory Underground. Was I was like, aha, like here are some people who it feels like see the thing that I see, which is that none of this makes any fucking sense, and that, you know, my hardcore leftist friends and my hardcore rightist friends just both, it doesn't, what they're saying doesn't match my experience of reality.
Fuck yeah, dude.
Oh, who went last? Where were we?
It was Yakub.
Yeah,
We're right here.
You against the
Even
This is
okay,
not
where
page
this is not
143,
okay,
second
yeah,
paragraph.
Yeah, got you. Yeah, this is not to say that there are no forms of futurism associated with economic critique. Some left libertarians and some Marxists advocate forms of accelerationism. Accelerationists critique the economic system, but doubt the ability of the political system to meaningfully reform the economy on its own. Instead, they hope that future technological changes will eventually force the economic system to change. By increasing the intensity of economic development, they hope to accelerate these new technological changes and hasten the arrival of a new era. Much of this is based in some way on readings of Karl Marx's theory of history. On these readings, capitalism breaks down and dissolves traditional social structures, creating a sociological vacuum that must eventually be filled with something new. There are many different versions of what the something new is meant to be, how the something new is relevant to come about. How the something new is meant to come about. Economic and technological determinists straightforwardly argue that as capitalism develops technology, automation will render the employer-employee relationship obsolete, forcing us to develop new economic and social structures. More dialectical accounts argue that as capitalism develops, it creates new modes of thinking and being, and these new forms of consciousness enable us to act in fundamentally new ways. Whether this happens through a kind of determinism, human agency, raw contingency, or some combination of these things, these accounts share a core feature. Problems with the economy are overcome not primarily through political means, but by continuing with the process of economic development until it runs its course, in some sense. These types of Marxism are forms of futurism, insofar as futurism avoids contemporary electoral politics by leaning in economically, by committing to seeing capitalism through to its conclusion. Both the right libertarian and left accelerationist hope that capitalism will eventually deliver a better life. The right libertarian might be excited to go to Mars with Elon Musk, but the left accelerationists might hope that the process of trying to go to Mars will end in the annihilation of Musk's empire. Both think that something of value will eventually be accomplished by continuing down this path, by sticking with this system and seeing where it leads. Futurism, then, is a kind of de facto endorsement of existing economic trends. Whether out of genuine commitment to the existing system or out of a belief that this system will open up new possibilities in the future, futurists are often interested in helping oligarchs and the corporations achieve their near-term goals. While these goals are pitched as private and non-political, they have clear political consequences. They further enrich the oligarchs and further code the positions of the workers, professionals, and small employers. Futurism is a hope narrative about the economy. If you believe in the future of the economy, you can be induced to participate in politics to defend the economic system if and when it comes under threat. If you believe in specific oligarchs, celebrities, or corporations, you can be induced to participate in politics when doing so removes obstacles to the economic schemes of the specific people or firms in which you've placed your hope. You can do all this while cynically deriding the political system as hopelessly defective or behind the times. Indeed, the political cynicism of the futurist is the very thing that keeps the futurist political engagement from threatening democracy. The futurist has no interest in overthrowing democracy, not because the futurist cares about democracy, but because futurists have come to view politics itself as little more than a peripheral, annoying interloper in economic affairs. Oh, that is
Dude, that
fascinating.
like that shit. That's like a challenge. That's like Benjamin throwing down the gauntlet, or like I took this as like Benjamin saying, no, you can't just be satisfied to be the doomer, because I think left accelerationists are silly, but I also think I was previously satisfied to say I don't care about politics. It's not real. It doesn't matter. We don't need to think about it right now. We need to do theory right now. So it was like a black pill on politics as they currently exist. And then Benjamin comes along and says, no, they do exist. And they exist, and they're working right now to maintain the stasis, like to keep us locked in the situation that we're locked in. So while it's frustrating, and while we should kind of eschew political commitments, and we should do this moratorium, and we should be critical of politics, we also have to understand that, like, there are these vast bureaucratic structures that we have to engage with them. We will have to engage with them. We can't just imagine that we'll have some radical revolution and then all of a sudden we won't have to grapple with these structures. And for me, like talking to Benjamin over the last year or whatever, it was this part of his argument that kind of challenged me to take politics seriously once again. Because for a long time I was just like, yeah, whatever. Like I used to be a fucking anarchist, and then I became some kind of Possadist, and now I don't care. But now I have to like re-engage with these structures, take them seriously, I guess.
Yeah.
So, go ahead, Kier.
Well, I could talk for a long time, so go ahead. What have you got in mind?
I just wanted to ask, what does Benjamin mean by there are things we have to give up now so that we get them back in the future? Is that potentially something that, because I don't know how to interpret that, and so part of me wants to say that he's being accelerationist when he's saying that, but I think that's too hasty a conclusion also, so I'm trying to check myself there, you know.
I think very much the notion of democracy is like we do want democracy. Like at the end of the day, we do want the ability to self-determine our own most. We do want the ability to maybe not determine, but at least, influence what our daily lives look like. And so the word democracy as it exists in the world today, that's not what it is. But there's still like a pull toward it, and there's still a commitment to it, and it's tied up with liberty, and it's tied up with emancipation, and it's even tied up with morality and ethics.
Okay, okay. If that's what he's getting at, then I'm fucking on board as fuck because
Yeah.
like I almost feel like we have to annihilate whatever conceptions we currently have about democracy, and that might involve annihilating democracy as we know it in order to recover it at some later date. You know,
Fuck
and
yeah.
that's very important to me is to recovering it at some later date with an eye towards that. You know, my only concern about this, we might have to give things up to get them back, is that one of the things that we might have to give up, and it's something we can never get back. We can never get back our survival as a species, you know. So that's one thing. I'm like one of the. I'm not saying this is what Benjamin's saying, but one of the eventualities of this, the potential outcomes of the sort of post-human age we're entering into is no more humans, you know. And so I'm very concerned about that, and so on that I'm like, well, maybe some conservatism is merited as well, you know, some standing astride history, yelling stop at something, you know. I don't know if we can even do that, if that's even possible. So
Well,
realistically,
I think that's why we still need to do some kind of humanism, like
Yeah.
like directly as a result, because we are living in this kind of post transhuman moment or anti-human moment, whatever. And yeah, we have to do some type of humanism. But that also does involve asking, what is the human? Like, and I do think that we will necessarily have to change our relation to the form if we want to protect the content. Like I think transhumanism is here whether we want it to be here or not. Blah blah. I don't know. This is something I could fucking talk about for hours, but yeah, it's
let's give Kira a chance to say what she wants to say too.
Yeah, well, this whole chapter is really making me like, it's very interesting to think like, yeah, how's politics like infiltrating all these things? And it's really gotten me thinking kind of in the mirrored way of like, where do things appear to be political that are not? And who thinks they're doing politics that is not doing politics? And I don't know, like between like Zizek and Finkelstein and like both of those pieces in the Theory Underground anthology, I've just really started to wonder. I'd also say Tyler Austin Harper, who's kind of a Lacanian socialist who writes for The Atlantic. They all are kind of making me wonder whether, like, when I hear something like police abolition or prison abolition, which I used to support, and it feels even strange to say used to, because who is like, yay police, yay prisons, I love that shit, right? Like, but it's also like, what recently when I've tried to like drill down with someone and be like, okay, what is abolition? What does that mean? Can you give me a policy? Like, how does that happen? How do you conceive of that happening? It's really frustrating because they will name reform after reform after reform, and I will be like, yep, support that, I support that, I support that. So then where's the abolition, right? And it seems as though, and I'm not trying to straw man here, although I may be, but it seems as though the idea is that like in our current moment, in our current system, we are not able to conceive of the possibilities that a shift in consciousness will create in the future in terms of like how we can deal with like violence and theft and crime, whatever. And I don't know, I struggle with that a lot as like a former utopian, and I probably still am, even though I don't want to be. But there's something that like bothers me about that, especially like, I don't know, like getting older, having people experience violence, having prison be the only way to keep your ex away from you. Things like that, that really like, often if I bring up something like that, the abolitionist will kind of, it's almost like it's a conservative dog whistle to be like, okay, but what about like really violent people? That's like, I don't think that is, or that's some sort of like gotcha. And I'm like, I'm really not using it as a gotcha. Like, I really want to know if you have a convincing argument about what we do, not just with violent people, but with like violent people with no remorse and no regret and no desire to change and no ability to change. And that's most people. That doesn't describe most people in prisons. It does describe some people that I'm worried about. Anyways, the reason I'm going down this path is because I've really started to wonder, like, is prison abolitionism this position that you can hold that never requires you to actually do anything? It doesn't require you to engage with like current policy and what can be changed. Like I said, all of that could fit under reformism. So what is distinct about the abolition that doesn't fall under reform? I don't know, and I don't want to come at this from like a cynical, like, haha, got you, you don't really care way, but more in a sense of like Tyler Austin Harper talks about how, you know, having a professor of like Afro-pessimism and a professor of decolonial studies and a professor of ABCD, things that sound really radical. All that is window dressing for these incredibly economically conservative institutions, private institutions of universities. So then if that is the case, and it's not about like the individual intentions of these professors, right? It's not saying that they're disingenuous. It's just saying like that the role that they play in these institutions is the opposite of political. It's the opposite of radical. It's the opposite of revolutionary. And now when I hear land back, when I hear prison abolition, like when I hear these certain things that are like literally will never happen, it's like, again, sort of like, what does that do? What does that mean outside of what the person who's saying it thinks it means? And is it possible? Like, and I think some of Finkelstein's stuff seems to get at this. It's like, is it anti-political? Is it non-political or apolitical to take these impossible positions that you can't even describe, that you can't even explain, and that you can't even like connect in any like reasonable way to our current situation, government structures, policies, etc.?
I think
I have a bunch of thoughts on that. Nance, you want to go though?
I think Sartre was talking to Che or Fidel. I can't remember one or the other, but like he was like he said like, give me the moon, like, and that was his response to like, they were like talking about the necessity of all the horrible things that had to happen. And I mean, look, it's arguable, like maybe Che was a good guy, maybe he was a bad guy, maybe, like, I don't fucking know, I'm not here to answer that question. But the fact that there are so many people who talk about like, we must have impossible demands, we must keep up these impossible demands, like that becomes, it does work. It does work for the neoliberal institution. It does work for the fucking police state. Like for us to be able to point at the university and say, well, what do you mean? We have post-colonial studies. We have all this stuff. We did the land acknowledgement when we started this. It's not just a disavowal. It's like a ritual cleansing, and it does away with the complicity of the stasis, the material conditions, the currently existing structures of power that are predicated on all this inhuman, like horrible shit that's going on. It becomes, well, but at least we're doing these good things. And so it gives like well-meaning people who I believe do have like this radical impulse, it gives them permission to not actually engage in anything real and concrete, because they're saying, well, at least I'm doing this. So that's permissive. So like, Sean, when you're talking about permissive, like the permissive world we live in, like it's this thing, it's everywhere. It is permissive implicitly as well as explicitly, but the explicit permission is more like an injunction. So it's a commandment and it's an unfreedom. You are commanded to have no limits. But implicitly, the system that we have is permissive by giving itself, by way of the legitimacy that it maintains, like it gives itself permission to continue going on. We're like, well, yeah, it would be cool if we, I don't know, stopped fucking genociding South Americans so we could have coffee and sugar and nutmeg. But at least we're doing land back, and at least we have post-colonial studies, like, and so it becomes permission, and it hijacks. I think it hijacks the radical impulse. Like, we should be aware of the fact that many of these people do actually care. This is real. The people who are doing the land acknowledgements, it matters deep at the core of. So while it's fun to joke about, it's also true that they believe in it. So we need to destroy their belief in it. We don't need to just ridicule them for saying that's silly. We need to actually show them that what they are doing is a part of this fucking global system of genocide. So maybe we don't need to maintain the radical or the impossible demands. Maybe we, and I mean, fuck, dude. And then people, well, you're just doing realpolitik, and that's just, now you're compromised. Like, and it's like, no, I'm not just doing that. I'm genuinely trying to come up with concrete activity, as opposed to performative language games where I have impossible demands. We're not free until we're all free. And while that's true, it also becomes permission to not strive to become free.
Let me be an asshole so y'all don't have to. I think some of these people are smart enough to know better. Some of these people are smart enough to be able to figure out fucking like what the role they're really playing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'll be the dick. Fuck them. They're all liberal piece of shit PMC fucking douchebags. Like,
no, I mean that. I want to be
just because a person is smart enough to figure it out doesn't mean that they can afford to burn that psychic capital and accept what it means that tweeting land back now is never going to make the lives of any indigenous people in California better in and of itself. Whether or not it's raising consciousness, it's not a real world action. It's just an action that makes you feel better about your role in the PMC and your actual furthering of global genocidal, colonial, everything that you're actually against. Believe genuinely in your heart you're against.
We have to understand that it is no longer the case that the workers of the world, like, they don't just have nothing but their chains to lose. Like the world has changed. Material conditions are changed. People do have to protect their position. Everybody is precarious. Like, we no longer have nothing to lose but our chains. We have children. We have mortgages. Like, the precarity of today is different from the precarity of 200 years ago. There is no proletariat. Not only is there no working class because it's fractured and it's been outsourced to the global south and parts of fucking Eastern Europe, it's also true that there's no more proletarian subject. Like, we all have been provided with more than just our labor power to sell on the open market. So you can't ask people to put their children or their dependent parents or whatever at risk for the movement. Like, that just can't be standing in the way of class consciousness and solidarity.
Yeah, and it feels like a lot of these careers are built on like pointing out hypocrisy and contradiction. And it's like, I agree. Yes. Now what? Like, great job. Yes, I maybe I don't want to support capitalism. Oh, but I spend money. Like, oh, you got me. And like, there's more complex versions of that where it's like, oh, around colonization or this or that, the other. It's like, yeah, yes, and question mark. What? I mean, we all have the same question. I mean, I don't know what to do either. So I don't think these people know it and are like holding it secret or anything like that. But it's just I don't know, like pseudo activity. Like, it's, yeah, this book has just made me so curious about like, well, what about like if the situation is this impossible, if we can't change anything under current conditions, like, what of all the people that are trying to, like, what do we make of that behavior? And yeah, like on many different levels, like how they understand themselves, like what they're actually doing in the structure that they're in, how it is cynically exploited by certain people, how people have a self-awareness, or they have like layers of like what they're willing to say publicly and what they actually believe. Yeah, all of it is really, yeah, interesting to me.
And y'all are right, by the way, to not infer bad intention on the half of these people. I think that's the correct interpretive practice, for sure. But I also wanna hold open a little bit, like, what if though?
I
Like, I'm
mean,
not
it's a
saying,
thought
I just wanna
exercise.
hold it,
Yeah.
what if? What
Well,
if
one
there
way-
is bad
But one
intentions?
question you could ask, one question you might could ask is like, okay, like Che, like he's doing a utopian project, but he's also definitely doing politics. Like he's definitely doing politics.
Mm.
And I think you could ask when someone tweets land back, and that's the whole sum total of their work is, are they doing politics, or who is doing politics with them? Like who is doing the politics here? I think I've read Adolf Reed Jr.'s Black Particularity Reconsidered,
Fuck yeah.
which is very useful in talking about massification, and like when you have a mass, like that we have this idea of a mass movement. It's funny that I don't know, it's very frustrating. It's most leftists I know. I'm like, what do we need? What do we do? They're like, we need a mass movement. And it never goes farther than that. And then whenever you see something is going wrong, something's bad, you see mass protests. And so what Adolf Reed Jr. gets at is that the mass needs leaders. Like the mass leadership relationship is baked in. So you cannot have a mass without leaders, and you cannot have leaders without a mass to lead and to ostensibly represent. And so one thing you could maybe say that somebody who is tweeting Landback is doing is providing a mass, creating a mass that then professors can claim to represent and can, exchange for social capital, or I don't know, exchange for real capital. But yeah, so I do think it's politics. I just wonder whose politics,
This is also theological. I love it.
Hmm.
Like I'm seeing all kinds of these like parallels that we don't have time to go into with like the Protestant Reformation right now.
Dude.
This is
Well,
insane.
yeah. Speaking
It's
of
almost the
Jack-
question of like, can you be a foot soldier for the exact opposite of what you think
Mm.
that you are representing?
I think abso-fucking-lutely. I really do think that, like, that really it's like the only politics in town are the Republican and Democratic Party politics. And so if you're trying to do politics, like that's the politics you're doing. And it's like I think about like the Palestine protests. I think about what were they called? The uncommitted. That seemed like a real, like that. If anybody's got fucking leverage, right? You'd think it's like hundreds of thousands of people who are saying, I won't vote for you. And they stood outside of the DNC, and they wanted a speaker at the DNC. That was their demand. And when they didn't get it,
Dude.
they, said, fuck you guys. And then they walked away, and that was it. And it's like, what? I don't know. It's like, it just feels like that it's all, I don't know. I mean, this is my subjective destitution or kind of ranting disillusionment, but it's just like, man, I just get going in these fucking spaces and everybody's well-meaning, and it's just, but we're all just doing a bunch of fucking nonsense. You know what I mean? We're just like, just doing a bunch of shit that doesn't make any sense. And I don't know, my cat's right.
I am running out of time, so my request for us to do is to just burn through and read straight through to the end, and then if we have time at the end, we can do some more discussion. Otherwise, I'm going to run out of time. So,
Thanks. Forgive the rant.
oh no, not at all. I mean, I'm here for it. I just, yeah, if there was more time, then I would be, yeah, we would all be ranting for hours. Cool. Alrighty. I have no idea where we left. I think I read last, didn't I? So it should be Kier.
Okay, I'll pick it up then. The American Subaltern. The Americans who retreat into the 4Fs are politically stuck. They are part of America, but they cannot get American political institutions to act for them. They can vote, and they might intermittently feel representative descriptively, symbolically, pictorially, and theatrically, but these forms of representation don't help them deal with the real problems they face in their day-to-day lives. I want to suggest that increasingly these Americans are a kind of subaltern. The idea of the subaltern originates in the prison notebooks of Antonio Gramsci, an Italian politician who was imprisoned by the Mussolini regime in the 1920s and 30s. In the late 20th century, the idea of the subaltern became associated with total exclusion from representation. Theorists like Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak drew a sharp distinction between the subaltern and the citizen, suggesting that the subaltern lacks what the citizen possesses. On this kind of view, the citizen is represented while the subaltern is not. If the subaltern is totally excluded from citizenship, it would seem ridiculous to describe the majority of Americans as subaltern. The term would seem to be more appropriate for colonized peoples or marginalized groups. But Gramsci himself applied the term in a Western European context to the majority of the citizens living in countries like France and Italy. More recent interpretations of Gramsci break down the binary distinction between the subaltern and the citizenry. Political theorist Peter Thomas puts it this way: citizenship is conceived not as a supplement or corrective to the subaltern's otherness, but as one of the forms of the political expression of subalternity. In other words, citizenship and subalternity in the prison notebooks are in a relationship of simultaneous co-institution. The two concepts can be regarded as different vocabularies for describing, and in doing so, validating or challenging, the same historical process. On the one hand, the narrative of political modernity as the consolidation of juridical forms guaranteeing individual rights and responsibilities within a homogeneous political community. On the other hand, the history of the constitution of hegemonic relations, of subordination between classes and groups, with dominance by one group in political society depriving other groups of the capacity for self-direction and autonomous political initiative in civil society. Conceived as two sides of the same coin, the two vocabularies can thus be seen as developing in parallel, reinforcing or subverting each other. I'll do one more paragraph. Thomas expressly links this account of the subaltern to political theorist Etienne Balibar's idea of the citizen subject. Ordinary citizens in modern Western democracies never fully actualize the capacities we ascribe to them. They are always subjects of a political system they do not and cannot control. Yet they are never fully recognized as subjects precisely because the rights and capacities associated with citizenship are always ascribed to them. This allows the citizens to be blamed for everything that happens. As citizens, it is their civic duty, their responsibility to politically engage. Yet when they do politically engage, they find that they are subjects, that their political efforts do not issue in anything real. When they don't do politics, they are blamed for failing to act, and when they do try to do politics, they find they cannot do it, except in the most superficial and meaningless senses.
We can think of the subaltern as the part of society that has the formal rights of citizenship but cannot make full use of those rights. It is nominally and superficially represented and included in politics, but its interests are never politically realized. Often in the United States, we think of minorities and marginalized groups as disenfranchised, but the subaltern is a pseudo-enfranchised majority. The majority of Americans are workers, fallen professionals, and small employers. Most American citizens cannot fully operationalize the rights of citizenship. Their experience of American citizenship is the dominant experience. In this way, what it means to be an American citizen in the 21st century is in large part to be alienated from the political capacities that have been formally ascribed to you. The political professionals and their followers constantly berate subaltern Americans for the degree to which they are politically deactivated. They scorn the subaltern tendency to prefer private life to public life, to seek solace in the 4 Fs. By heaping blame and shame on the subaltern for failing to use political capacities that exist only on paper, the political professionals and their followers only further alienate the subaltern. If we listen to the sound of American culture, We hear an intense culture war waged by hyper-politicized professionals in a language learned at university. But if we look closely, beneath all that noise, the subaltern quietly disdains what passes for 21st century American politics. This quiet disdain is difficult to access. The subaltern Americans are not oligarchs and cannot easily make themselves heard through the media platforms and institutions that oligarchs control. Because many in the subaltern understand that trying to do politics is pointless, they rarely express political views in public. When they do express political views, they often do not focus on making their views shareable or marketable or search engine optimized. On those rare occasions where members of the subalterns do make themselves heard, it is often when they have been reactivated. Political professionals and oligarchs infiltrate the 4Fs to sow conflict for the purposes of extracting political action from the subaltern. Subaltern political acts are therefore very often a response to perceived or real provocations or threats from the dominant classes. The subaltern therefore does not take the offensive and organize itself politically for reasons wholly its own. So when it does appear to speak, it often speaks as a sock puppet for the classes that have stirred it up. The actions attributed to it are astroturfed. There's no real grass. Some political professionals make claims about what the subaltern thinks, even I am doing here. Often we mistranslate or misrepresent it, deliberately or by accident. When political professionals misrepresent the subaltern is rarely in position to effectively challenge the misrepresentation. So, when an interpretation of the subaltern is challenged, it is most often challenged by other professionals. These conflicts over what the subaltern thinks are less about getting at the truth of the matter than they are about fighting for turf, for market share. Political professionals who genuinely understand the subaltern might plausibly know how to politically activate it. When members of the subaltern are activated, they consume political media, and so professionals who can activate parts of the subaltern make effective campaign strategists. They can write popular books. They can start popular TV shows, YouTube channels, and podcasts. The wider the gulf between the political professionals and the subaltern, the more valuable this subaltern whispering becomes, and it only grows wider as economic inequality deepens and the professional's university language becomes more obscure and less accessible.
BreadTube has entered the chat. The guys in the hot air balloons. I want to close this chapter with an extended metaphor. Let us think of political professionals as guys in hot air balloons. Political professionals are given hot air balloons by the oligarchs who support them. The balloons allow the professionals to fly high above the subaltern Americans who are stuck on the ground. As the professionals have taken off in their balloons, things have gotten increasingly desperate on the ground. Things have grown increasingly desperate on the ground. A host of disasters afflict the ground-bound. There are fires and floods and attacks by every manner of wild beast. Daily life becomes harder and more stressful as the subaltern contends with all these things. From their balloons, the professionals claim they can see safe places where the subaltern might go. The professionals try to lead the subaltern to these places, calling down to them from their balloons, directing them first one way, then another. At first, they try to stay close enough to the ground to be heard. Some even stay low enough to see the dangers in detail, to give highly relevant, practical advice. If they don't fly too high, they can hear a shout now and then from the ground. They are not part of the conversation down there, but they can hear snippets. The more members of the subaltern a professional manages to lead, the more rewards that professional receives from the oligarchs. They get nicer balloons with additional amenities and comforts. There's an incentive to talk to more people at once, to promise bigger and bolder things. In an effort to spot more inspiring places to go, the professionals start to raise their balloons higher. As they go higher, they hear less of the conversation on the ground, and they no longer see the dangers in any detail. As they spend more time in the sky, the conditions on the ground no longer seem real to them. The fate of the subaltern becomes an abstract thing, not a pressing concern. The perks the oligarchs offer, on the other hand, seem very real. Before long, the professionals will say anything to get the subaltern to follow. They will pretend to see safe places where there are new forms of danger, and they will often put the subaltern in harm's way. But as long as they maintain a following, they continue to receive more perks. Increasingly, they don't even bother to look at the ground. They are too high up to see much of anything down there anyway. Instead, they look at one another's balloons, noticing the amenities others have that they have not yet won for themselves. They become increasingly obsessed with flying higher than the rest, with seeing further. As they go higher, it becomes harder for the subaltern to hear them. They drift into the clouds and lose their touch. The oligarchs are untroubled by this. They move on to younger, less experienced professionals who have not yet flown too high to be of use. Increasingly, professionals accept the balloons because they themselves are desperate to escape conditions on the ground. Increasingly, a hot air balloon from an oligarch is the only way to escape the ground's dangers. And once a professional accepts a hot air balloon, the experience of being in the sky begins to do its work. Slowly but surely, the fate of the subaltern becomes abstract. The appeal of the perks asserts itself. Try as they might, the professionals cannot use their balloons to help the people on the ground. Slowly, the balloons themselves become associated with the indifference and cruelty they engender in the professionals who fly in them. The subaltern comes to view the balloons as wicked, fell things. Now the subaltern becomes suspicious, and it is only through the most insidious forms of deception that a professional can lead the subaltern and enjoy the perks. Some professionals who have only recently received their balloons still care too much for those on the ground. They refuse to participate in the deceptions. To make an example of them, the oligarchs pop their balloons. This pruning of the professional class is highly effective. The surviving rump professionals get the memo. In the end, the subaltern comes to view the professionals as demons, as corrupted spirits sent down by satanic oligarchs to ensorcel them. The mistrust becomes so deep that it becomes impossible for the professionals to be seen to do anything else, and yet no one dares challenge the system. In other places, the dangers are thought to be even worse, and the balloonists are thought to be even more cruel. So, there is no revolution, no grand moment of revolt. Instead, the subaltern expends most of its time and energy doing its level best to avoid the dangers on the ground and find safe places to hide for a while to preserve its sanity in the face of new ruses. The further this goes, the more the subaltern despairs about actualizing the powers of citizenship. It accepts that democracy is the only political system and that democracy works in this frustrating, dissatisfying way. Instead of trying to replace or reform democracy, a despairing subaltern tries to avoid wasting its energy on politics. It hopes to keep that energy for other purposes, among these the 4 Fs. And so, democracy invents more insidious ways to extract political energy, in part by interfering with the 4 Fs, destabilizing these spaces, and harassing the Americans who try to retreat into them. Instead of a way of self-actualizing, participating in democratic politics becomes a burden, a menace, a thing to fear and to avoid at great cost. Democracy becomes a succubus, a vampire, a leech on the energies of those unfortunate enough to remain subject to it. In this way, democracy passes from a system built upon hope and fear to one of outright despair. Bum, bum, bum.
Well, good job, Studebaker. You have black-pilled me.
Yeah.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah. Thank you, but also fuck you.
Exactly.
We lose Jacob.
Yeah, his balloon popped. Shucks.
We don't have balloons. What are you talking about? We're working on it.
Yeah,
but...
yeah.
Is
He
the
got
metaphor for is the metaphor for Theory Underground that it's like the people like the subaltern. A couple of us in the subaltern have our own balloon. Is that the metaphor?
Well, we're building the people's
An
balloon.
oligarch balloon.
We're building the people's balloon. The Democratic
Yeah, I
People's
think
Republic
we're,
of
like,
Balloon.
We're trying to put a basket together, and we
Yeah.
don't have any idea what we're doing. But
Yeah, we're a bunch of
scrappy.
monkeys, like trying to weave a wicker basket.
something like that.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna hit bye bye YouTube, and then we can say bye bye in real life. So bye bye YouTube.
Bye bye YouTube.
Boom. Oh no, not yet. And okay. Dude, that was really good. I think today was very good, guys.
Yeah.